this is a great place to talk about the global financial architecture and how to change the picture for Africa.
Yeah, yes, indeed. So this is almost setting the stage for us in terms of what you can expect, particularly with me and Tsepiso in the next 4 hours. But in between, we'll be having some very important conversations, and some of them with our colleagues. Innocent Samosa joins us now, and he's been busy the whole year. Because as soon as South Africa took over the presidency of the G20, a lot of work started. Innocent, the business reporter, but he wears many hats around the channel. It has been a busy year for South Africa in getting us to this day.
Yeah, indeed, Peter. Very good morning to our listeners once again. I think it's safe to say South Africa is hosting one of the most significant gathering of leaders, world leaders, and in fact, when I was coming from the airport, it felt like 2010. But now we're coming from the airport, it felt like 2010. But now we're having a world. Because the president also said that, during when South Africa took the presidency, he mentioned that we'll put the African agenda on top of the discussions here, and I think South Africa has done that, and many analysts have echoed that. South Africa has passed with flying colors, even with these geopolitical tensions again with America. But they feel that South Africa has done well, and like you rightly indicated, Peter, the work has been done throughout the year with different groups, shepherd tracks. Today, we're hoping that tomorrow we'll get. The United States says that we must not continue with the declaration, but I think this was indeed a successful G20. Big up to the South African delegation. They've done pretty much well.
Innocent, let me ask you this question, just following up on what you've just said, that the ideal is we come out of this with a declaration.
Yeah.
But with the absence of the big powers, the question then becomes whether this would be pageantry or we really, even if we do get a declaration, won't the implementation be difficult? Because there still has to be negotiations back with those big powers to ensure that the agenda is cemented.
You're totally right, Tsepiso. For an example, South Africa's agenda also was pushing for climate financing. And one of the biggest polluters, like the United States, they are not budging to actually push for that financing. It's a good question. Will it hold water without the big superpowers? I don't know. I don't know because America still remains one of the biggest economies and their strategic partner to South Africa. It really remains to be seen. That's why I guess maybe it's important that we really strengthen the South-South cooperation so that it can be resilient. But that will come with pain, we know, because if you piss America, we might have a situation where we get sanctioned or ANC members get sanctioned, and I guess they know that might be on the cards. Without America, will the declaration hold water? It remains to be seen, but I think it's going to be a challenging one because there are a lot of issues on the table, as you rightly indicated. The issues around restructuring the financial, reforming the financial architecture, which was also on top of the table. But I guess because the World Bank is here, the IMF is here, they will hear what leaders are saying about the cost of borrowing, particularly for African countries and emerging countries, as you indicated earlier. So that will be top of the agenda. But again, I guess it's just wait and see. But the most important thing here is that if we get a declaration, let's push the South-South cooperation, strengthen it so that we can be able to trade and also put in issues around the Africa Continental Free Trade Area so that will also be, a buffer. But again, I think the challenge here is that that will come with pain, particularly for entrepreneurs and business. And the question is business ready to deal with that pain? Well, again, it remains to be seen.
So, Innocent, you've done a lot of traveling and you've been to a lot of conferences. I'm always curious in terms of what are the expectations that you've been hearing from people on the ground, from business, and I wonder if we're not expecting too much.
Yeah, I think we're expecting too much because we believe that South Africa is capable of pushing that agenda and pushing the bar. For example, issues around the just energy transition. When I attended the just energy, the second ministerial meeting on just energy transition with the Minister of Electricity and Energy, Hossein Turamho, it was resolved that there's a need to push the nuclear energy. There's a need for a mix of energy, but also the big question has been that of energy poverty, saying that there is energy, there is electricity, but there's still the poverty side of things where it's not accessible, it's expensive. So those are some of the things that they were echoing. But also from the MK party, they were excited that the IMF, for example, they're now warming up, the World Bank rather, they're now warming up to the fact that we can now go ahead with nuclear energy. But back then, you'd remember that in South Africa, if you touch nuclear energy, it was taboo. But the expectations, I think people are pretty much excited, and they believe that South Africa is actually able and it's capable to push the agenda and push the bar a little bit higher with regards to the expectation around clean energy, green energy, and energy mix.
Interesting that you talk about clean energy. I was at the G20 African Energy Investment Forum yesterday, and as you say, there are expectations, brings to the fore what people are hoping for. Peter's asking, just what is possible. But what I found interesting about that gathering yesterday, one of the panelists I was speaking to was actually saying Africa is here to support South Africa, but because it's a moment for African cohesion. So that then speaks to the importance of the various regional bodies to strengthen that cohesion through African Union platforms, building a unified negotiation space and position. So how do we leverage this G20 summit to strengthen? You spoke about South-South, cooperation, but there's also the danger of further alienating America with its leaning on the BRICS alignment. But it's about, I suppose, how brave African countries and institutions are and can be. What is the capacity, what is the feeling on the ground about whether they would brave being out in the cold and focus on that African agenda?
Well, I from where I'm sitting, Tepi, so I don't think they're resilient. I don't think they're ready to face the pain that comes with the changes in for example, the issues around multilateralism. I don't think they're ready, but behind closed doors, I get a sense that business really, they still want to trade with their American counterparts. But the challenge is that now the political cycle has muddied the water. Again, I think what we are essentially going to see is that business will have to, not put politics inside business, because that can deter the whole process of trading with each other. But with the American president, it does seem as though he wants to be in charge of everything. And yeah, it's going to be interesting. I think this question, this episode, needs an analyst who would be able to break it down. But as a reporter, I get a sense that business is not really ready to basically face the pain that comes with, not being aligned with the American agenda.
Right. Okay, Innocent, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much indeed for the work that you've been doing, particularly on the G20 this past year. And great talking to you, giving us some insights on the business aspect in particular. But I guess we'll see at the end of tomorrow what it all meant. A lot of work's been done, as you've said, but what does it all mean in the end? Innocent Samosa, our business reporter. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
This weekend, South Africa will host the G20 summit at the Nazareth. Insights from the main venue. And so, our regular lineup will be adjusted just a little bit for this weekend to accommodate the G20. On Saturday, the 22nd of November, the Oasis will broadcast for 2 hours. Out and About takes a break for a full look at the G20. After Africa Chart Toppers, our news and current affairs team will bring you special live broadcasts in 5 different languages directly from Nasrec. And normal programming will resume at 8 p.m. Central African Time. And then on Sunday, the 23rd of November, the Oasis will also broadcast for 2 hours. Tech Africa steps aside for our news and current affairs teams to bring you special live broadcast in which is then. Current affairs teams to bring you special live broadcast in 5 different languages. Then Planting the Seed resumes from 1 p.m. till 2 p.m. Central African Time. Channel Africa, your window to the continent, connecting you to the world in an African perspective. Africa Update on Channel Africa with Lulu Kabu.
Mozambique's opposition leader Venancio Mondlane has been charged with incitement to terrorism and disobedience. He faces a total of 5 charges. The charges relate to post-election violence that left hundreds of people dead. What punishment is he looking at?
Charges are charged for mobilizing people for terrorism during the protests. These charges are really serious and severe. If he is condemned, is found guilty, he could serve 10 years plus years in jail, meaning that he would be banned from political participation, mainly for the 2028 and 2029 electoral cycle.
The director of CDD, the Center for Democracy and Development, Adriano Novunga.
Africa Update with Lulu Kabu, 12 to 1 p.m. Central African Time. Africa in Business on Channel Africa.
The United States was very vocal at the beginning of South Africa's G20 presidency, and this is largely due to strained relations with South Africa at the time, that they were not really keen on participating. Where do they stand right now?
The US is planning to take over the presidency of the G20 next year, and our understanding from them is that they intend to continue to do so, and therefore it is quite difficult then to be in a situation where you are not attending deputies' meetings or discussions during our presidency and then to take over the presidency next year. From a finance track perspective, there has been engagement. We've been working on a communique last week and this week here in Zimbabwe. What's important about that is that it's a consensus document. And so all the members in the room have to agree to the language that is used there. And our US colleagues have been part of those discussions and negotiations.
Bringing the African markets into your home. Channel Africa, the African perspective. The world is watching Johannesburg. Leaders from the planet's biggest economies gather to make decisions that shape nations, markets, and futures. You already know Channel Africa will be right there, bringing you the conversations, insights, and analysis that matter.
The best is yet to come.
The G20 Summit from the 22nd to the 23rd of November. As it happens, from an African perspective, stay tuned to Channel Africa and get all the G20 analysis. This weekend, South Africa will host the G20 Summit at the Nasrec Expo Center near Soweto. And Channel Africa will be right there to bring you live updates, interviews, and real-time insights from the main venue. And so, our regular lineup will be adjusted just a little bit for this weekend to accommodate the G20. On Saturday, the 22nd of November, the Oasis will broadcast for 2 hours. Out and About takes a break for a full look at the G20. After Africa Chart Toppers, our news and current affairs team will bring you special live broadcasts in 5 different languages directly from Nasrec. And normal programming will resume at 8 p.m. Central African Time. And then on Sunday, the 23rd of November, the Oasis will also broadcast for 2 hours. Tech Africa steps aside for our news and current affairs teams to bring you special live broadcasts in 5 different languages. Then, Planting the Seed resumes from 1 p.m. till 2 p.m. Central African Time. Channel Africa, your window to the continent, connecting you to the world in an African perspective. The G20 Summit through African eyes, live updates, and expert voices only on Channel Africa.
Okay, so you pick it up.
You're listening to a special live broadcast here at the Nasrec Expo Center here. You're listening to a special live broadcast here at the Nasrec Expo Center here on Channel Africa. Myself, Tsipiso Makwetla, and Peter Ndoro, bringing you live events, developments as they occur here at the G20 Leaders Summit. And we are taking you through the landscape, what is expected, what the implications are. And this time we talk about climate finance, debt relief, global financial reform and inequality, all of them expected to top Africa's agenda in the closed session here at Nasrec, South Africa, Johannesburg. And we're in conversation now with Dr. Frank Lekaba, who is a senior lecturer at Wits School of Governance, to get his perspective on this Leaders Summit, but just how some of the issues are expected to unfold. Dr. Lekaba, a very good morning. Actually, I'm already far ahead. Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Peace.
Thank you so much for being with us. Let me just start with this observation. You have said that it is very important that the youth are deeply embedded in the architecture of this summit, not only being represented, but the decisions that are taking place. From the leadership of South Africa, is there evidence of youth-led participation that will improve the youth multilateral reform space?
Sepiso, I had the privilege of interacting with young parliamentarians, which is a new initiative under the G20 South Africa presidency, where it organized young parliamentarians, giving young parliamentarians a voice. I spoke to young parliamentarians around issues of the role of the young people in global politics. My biggest concern is that young people see foreign policy as something out there, global politics as something out there, it doesn't affect them much and all of that. And then interestingly, there is a youth agenda by the UN, I think it's Youth 2030. And there's been a report that looked at that report, that tracked the implementation of the report. It's dire. The situation is dire. Globally, the report is not impressive in terms of the implementation. Member states of the UN, how they're implementing the youth agenda, that whole agenda. It's a youth agenda, same as the sustainable development, but more specific to the issues of the youth, unemployment and all of that. That report is not good in terms of what young people, where young people are in terms of global politics and all of that. So I was engaging these young parliamentarians, and from that experience and just looking broadly, I don't see young people participating as they should. And this stems from many reasons. I just want to maybe highlight one to say, that is one that I highlighted, that young people see foreign policy as something out there. Secondly, young people are not so much organized. They may be organized along party lines, but a movement like the Fees Must Fall that we saw, where young people cohered around one common agenda that benefited them, we don't see that. At the national level, at the regional level, and in the globe, we don't see those interfaces of young people interacting among each other and all of that. Look at the struggles of young people in Madagascar, the Gen Zs in Madagascar, and then you look at the South America, where the Gen Zs are coming up. They are raising the very same issues that young people have been raising. Why is these struggles continuous of young people being marginalized? Because young people are not so much organized, and they don't take foreign policy, global politics so much seriously.
Dr. Lekaba, I'm hoping that you're going to be with us for a while longer, because we're going to have to pause the conversation right now. Just to give a sense to our viewers, our listeners, what's happening, the leaders are starting to come into the building. They're starting to arrive, and so it gives us a sense that things are starting to really set up for the speech that's going to be delivered by the President a little bit later on. But coming up shortly, we're going to be listening to our French colleagues for 15 minutes or so, because this is a Pan-African broadcast. It is a Pan-African G20 summit, and so our French colleagues are going to be joining us in a few moments' time and taking us through what the agenda might be for Francophone Africa with the G20 summit. Stay with us for that.
The G20 summit through African eyes, live.
Hi, Peter. Yeah, the expectations for African French people are high, even though some think that the G20 summit won't have enough or strong or much impact on African matters. But in general, French African people are looking to the G20 summit as a moment to finally have their development priorities heard on the world stage. Key expectations from some of the people that I have spoken to include debt and sustainable financing. They're hoping for a push for debt restructuring, lower borrowing costs, and new funding mechanisms so countries can invest in health, education, and infrastructure instead of huge debt payment. For businessmen and women, they hope for trade and investment boost. Things such as unlocking the African continental free trade area, cutting trade barriers, and encouraging value-added manufacturing to grow economies in the continent. As for youth, they would like to be included more in the major decisions that are taken in this kind of meetings. They would like for their voices to be heard on the matters that concerns them. So, Peter, overall, Africans hope the summit will shift from aid dependency to a partnership that drives sustainable, inclusive growth across the continent. Voilà, chers auditeurs, merci de rester connectés à Channel Africa pour ce spécial programme G20. C'est enfin le grand jour, un moment historique s'ouvre pour l'Afrique du Sud et l'ensemble du continent avec le lancement ce samedi du sommet des dirigeants du G20, ce forum qui rassemble les principales puissances du monde pour discuter des grandes questions économiques mondiales. Il s'agit notamment de la France, le Canada, l'Allemagne, l'Argentine, l'Australie, le Brésil, la Chine, l'Espagne, l'Indonésie, l'Inde, l'Italie, le Japon, le Mexique, le Royaume-Uni, la Russie, la République de Corée, les États-Unis, la Turquie, l'Afrique du Sud qui assume la présidence cette année et deux organismes régionaux, notamment l'Union européenne et l'Union africaine qui est devenue membre en 2023. Pour rappel, le bloc a été créé en 1999 en réponse aux crises financières qui ont frappé les pays émergents à la fin des années 1990. Et l'ensemble, le G20, l'ensemble du G20 représente tous les continents habités, 85% du PIB mondial, 75% du commerce international et 60% de la population mondiale. 40 dirigeants sont attendus à ce sommet qui débute aujourd'hui à Johannesburg, 20 États membres ainsi que 20 autres qui ont été invités, notamment l'Égypte et le Nigeria pour la région Afrique. Il y a également des représentants des 23 organisations internationales et régionales qui vont participer à ce sommet. Et pour sa présidence cette année, l'Afrique du Sud a choisi un thème ambitieux, solidarité, égalité et développement durable, un thème qui reflète les priorités africaines et qui a guidé les discussions tout au long de l'année, des réunions ministérielles aux consultations avec les groupes d'experts du continent continent. Et d'ailleurs, l'Afrique du Sud assume cette présidence depuis le 1er décembre 2024. Elle a succédé au Brésil. Et dès le début de cette présidence, Pretoria a fixé des priorités, à savoir réformer l'architecture financière internationale, accélérer la transition énergétique juste et équitable, renforcer l'inclusion sociale et économique, notamment pour la jeunesse et les pays à faible revenu, l'allègement de la dette pour de nombreux pays africains, le développement durable, entre autres. Et autour de ces axes, plusieurs discussions, plusieurs cycles de discussions ont eu lieu dans le courant de l'année. Alors, il y a eu des réunions sur l'économie mondiale et la dette. Et pendant ces réunions, les premières rencontres, je voulais dire, du G20 ont été largement dominées par les questions de dette souveraine. Les ministres des Finances et gouverneurs des banques centrales ont souligné l'urgence de réformer les mécanismes d'allègement de la dette, jugés trop lents et inefficaces. Et les pays africains, soutenus par l'Union africaine, ont insisté sur ces points, notamment un rééchelonnement plus rapide, des taux d'intérêt plus équitables et une plus grande transparence dans les rôles des agences des notations. Les experts économiques africains qui étaient impliqués également pendant cette présidence du G20 de l'Afrique du Sud ont dénoncé des méthodes biaisées qui pèsent lourdement sur le coût de financement du continent et appellent à un organe de supervision internationale chargé de réexaminer ces pratiques. Une autre série de réunions a porté sur le commerce international. L'accent a été mis sur la nécessité de soutenir la transformation locale des matières premières, faciliter l'accès à des produits africains au marché du G20 et aussi investir massivement dans les chaînes des valeurs régionales, notamment l'agro-industrie, les minéraux critiques et le numérique. Les discussions ont également valorisé la zone de libre-échange continentale africaine, la ZLECAf, qui est considérée comme un pilier de la nouvelle architecture économique du continent. Il a également été organisé des réunions sur le climat, l'énergie et la transition juste tout au long de l'année. Le G20 énergie et le G20 climat ont mis en avant la question de la transition énergétique juste, un dossier clé pour l'Afrique du Sud. Les pays africains ont rappelé le paradoxe bien connu. Ils subissent les effets les plus sévères du changement climatique tout en ne représentant qu'une fraction, alors une petite fraction, des émissions mondiales. Et les recommandations phares formulées par les groupes techniques inclut notamment un financement plus accessible pour les énergies renouvelables, un soutien à la diversification énergétique et davantage de ressources pour le fonds pour les pertes et dommages cruciaux pour les pays vulnérables. Quant à la question d'inclusion sociale et développement humain, la jeunesse, l'emploi et la protection sociale, la présidence sud-africaine a également mis en avant le capital humain avec plusieurs réunions qui ont été dédiées à la formation, à l'innovation et à l'emploi des jeunes. Des recommandations ont été adoptées, notamment pour renforcer les systèmes de protection sociale, développer les compétences numériques, améliorer l'accès des jeunes entrepreneurs au financement et promouvoir des politiques d'égalité de genre. Et en ce qui concerne la sécurité et la stabilité, une discussion imposée par les réalités africaines parce que la sécurité n'est pas un mandat formel du G20. L'instabilité croissante dans plusieurs régions d'Afrique de l'Ouest et du Sahel, c'est quand même invité dans les débats du G20. Les leaders ont souligné le lien direct entre sécurité et développement et attractivité économique. Rappelons que l'insécurité coûte chaque année des milliards en croissance perdue. Donc, les recommandations finales et attentes africaines. Au fil des mois, les groupes d'experts, les ministres, les Sherpas du G20 ont formulé une série de recommandations qui ont été remontées au sommet des dirigeants, notamment quelques recommandations, créer un mécanisme de refinancement financement rapide pour les pays en difficulté, les pays d'Afrique, alléger le poids de la dette par les outils plus souples et plus rapides, réformer en profondeur les institutions financières internationales, doubler les financements climatiques d'ici 2030, soutenir les projets d'infrastructures stratégiques, notamment le numérique et énergétique, et renforcer la coopération entre le G20 et l'Union africaine en tant que nouveau membre permanent du G20. Voilà, en résumé, ce qui a été la présidence, les différentes activités qui ont eu lieu pendant la présidence de l'Afrique du Sud du G20 tout au long de cette année. Voilà, nous allons à présent vous proposer quelques réactions des différents citoyens africains. Ils ont réagi par rapport à la présidence du G20. Alors, nous y sommes. Le sommet des dirigeants ouvre ses portes aujourd'hui. Donc, sous la présidence de l'Afrique du Sud, une rencontre majeure. Cette rencontre est vraiment un moment historique qui réunit les puissances mondiales autour du thème solidarité, qui sont les thèmes choisis par l'Afrique du Sud, solidarité, égalité et durabilité, avec l'ambition d'apporter des réponses concrètes aux grands défis globaux. Pretoria, cette année, entend surtout faire porter la voix du continent sur plusieurs priorités, notamment le renforcement de la résilience face aux catastrophes, la soutenabilité de la dette, le financement d'une transition énergétique juste, ainsi que la valorisation des minéraux critiques pour une croissance inclusive et durable. Donc, comme je venais de vous le dire, Channel Africa est allé recueillir les attentes de plusieurs citoyens africains à l'issue de ce sommet. Je vous invite à suivre ce clip.
G20 ou G20, comme ça s'appelle en sigle, est le principal forum de coopération économique internationale. Un forum qui joue un rôle important dans la définition et le renforcement de l'architecture et de la gouvernance mondiale sur toutes les grandes questions économiques internationales. La tenue du sommet du G20 est pour moi une excellente nouvelle, et pour le continent africain aussi, je crois. Pour des raisons que cette tenue du G20 vient certainement avec de nombreux avantages politiques et diplomatiques. Le thème choisi par l'Afrique du Sud pour sa présidence du G20, c'est qui est solidarité, égalité, développement durable, est un très bon thème parce que l'interdépendance mondiale est inévitablement irréversible. L'humanité a besoin d'agir en solidarité contre les dangers dont l'humanité fait face. L'égalité, parce que malgré la différence des couleurs de la peau humaine, il n'y a qu'une seule espèce humaine. Et le développement, oui, parce que sans développement, la paix et la stabilité ne peuvent être qu'un simple rêve, alors qu'une Afrique non développée ne peut être qu'un danger économique pour les autres pays membres du G20. Le G20 pourrait aider l'Afrique en faisant de l'Afrique un continent partenaire au vrai sens du mot. Je crois que l'allègement de la dette des pays en développement, le financement de l'adaptation au changement climatique et à la croissance inclusive est une idée très noble. L'Afrique peut tirer parti des initiatives du G20 pour renforcer la stabilité politique et économique, en commençant par adhérer à la promotion des principes universels en gouvernance et à la gestion des ressources naturelles.
Bon, je pense que pour moi, le G20, autant pour moi, je pense que c'est un forum de coopération économique internationale qui ressemble, disons, je pense que ça ressemble à peu près 19 pays, mais également deux entités régionales, à savoir l'Union européenne et l'Union africaine. Et je pense que ce forum également, ces discussions, disons que ça tourne autour de l'économie, mais surtout sur le changement climatique, l'énergie et la santé. Bon, naturellement, je pense que c'est cette appréciation que j'ai sur le G20, disons. Donc, par rapport, comment dirais-je, au thème, pour moi, le thème doit être réel, c'est-à-dire, même après ce forum, tous les Africains se sentent qu'il y a véritablement la solidarité l'égalité et surtout le développement durable dans nos sociétés. Parce que on a beau parler de plusieurs thèmes sur différents forums, mais après justement après le constat, disons que ça semble d'être une fiction, c'est-à-dire on a beaucoup proposé des thèmes qui ont en tout cas une importance capitale sur l'Afrique, mais après sur le suivi, quand on fait l'évaluation ou bien quand on fait la suivi, on pense que c'est peine perdue ou en tout cas, sur la pratique, on ne le voit pas, quoi. Je pense que c'est ça. Et par rapport au changement aussi, moi déjà sur le plan économique, je pense que l'Afrique doit créer des partenariats stratégiques, mais aussi des partenariats gagnant-gagnant. Mais aussi, ce qui est mon attente carrément, c'est aussi l'implication des jeunes dans les instances de décision, mais aussi dans ces genres de forums. Ça doit être en tout cas une implication inclusive, c'est-à-dire ça ne doit pas être justement l'affaire des élites, l'affaire des chefs d'État, etc., etc. Les jeunes doivent être représentés là-bas, les acteurs culturels doivent être représentés là-bas, les jeunes qui militent sur la protection de l'environnement, qui militent en tout cas sur les questions vertes ou sur les questions bleues, il doit y avoir des représentants significatifs, c'est-à-dire de réels représentants doivent être là-bas. Ça ne se doit pas limiter juste aux affaires d'élite, aux affaires de gouvernement, entre autres. Ça doit être en tout cas une affaire de tous, une affaire en tout cas qui fait une inclusion, c'est-à-dire tout le monde doit y se sentir là-dedans, quoi. Je pense que c'est ça. Donc, au-delà de ça aussi, pour moi aussi, dans ces genres de forums, ce qu'on attend aussi, c'est une Afrique unie et solidaire. C'est-à-dire, après ces forums, le changement véritable qu'on attend réellement, pour moi, ça doit être une Afrique unie et une Afrique vraiment solidaire, quoi. Pour moi, l'Afrique peut tirer parti des initiatives du G20 en se concentrant naturellement sur le renforcement de ses propres cadres de gouvernance, en améliorant aussi, disons, son intégration, autant pour moi, son intégration dans l'économie mondiale, surtout grâce à des infrastructures et à un commerce accru. Et aussi en tirant sur les parties des investissements et des financements du G20 pour soutenir sa transformation, disons, économique et également sur sa stabilité.
Voilà, vous avez suivi les différentes attentes des citoyens africains pour ce sommet du G20 qui se déroule pour la première fois sur le sol africain. En tout cas, l'Afrique du Sud a insisté qu'elle veut faire entendre la voix du Sud global et surtout de l'Afrique à ce sommet. Voilà, chers Africains, merci de nous avoir suivis. Je vais repasser l'antenne à nos collègues qui animent en langue anglaise afin de poursuivre ce programme. Merci et au revoir.
Global leaders, African insights. Follow the G20 summit with Channel Africa as it happens.
Many thanks to our colleagues there from the French desk. Merci beaucoup pour ton émission. Nous voudrions parler avec vous à plus tard. Maintenant, nous continuons en anglais. We continue now in English. Thanks very much indeed for tuning in for this special broadcast here at NASREC in Johannesburg. And I've got to tell you that the leaders have started coming in already. And one by one, they're being greeted by the South African Deputy President, Paul Mashatile. So slowly but surely, we're starting to get ready for the speech by President Ramaphosa a little bit later on. But just to give you a G20 fact of the day today, G20 members include the world's major economies, and they represent 85% of global GDP, 75% of international trade, and 2/3 of the world's population. So this G20 grouping is significant by any stretch of the imagination.
You know, we're just about to get into what's trending. I think we've just found a new hashtag, like Peter does French. Very good, huh? So, Peter flexing there. But let's look at what's happening on social media. And we're joined now by Busisiwe Khatebe, SABC digital senior producer. And she's going to tell us what's making waves on the social media space. I actually was trying to look at X to see what is trending, but I can't really see anything obvious to do with G20.
Thank you, Tepiso. Good morning to the listeners. Yes, it's been trending for a while now. G20 South Africa, G20 summit. That has been trending, especially yesterday with the leaders, the world leaders arriving in South Africa. We've been seeing a lot of posts, and we've been seeing that the President Cyril Ramaphosa and the different countries have been having bilateral talks on the sidelines ahead of today's Leaders Summit meeting.
All right, thank you so much, Busisiwe. And I bring the time to 10 minutes to 9. And Peter, as you mentioned, this is very much a Pan-African broadcast, not only in theme because of the G20, but what we're doing here at Channel Africa, collaborating with our colleagues now in Nigeria.
Yes, indeed. And we say a very good morning to them. Thank you so much indeed for joining us and using local language. Howdy, body.
And let me just introduce them, Peter, for our listeners. It's Olu Kayode Iposu and Oiza Yusuf. Am I correct?
Hope you understand the country that I added to it.
Yes, we do. So, tell us, give us a sense of how people are in Nigeria embracing the G20 summit, particularly that it's on the African soil for the first time.
Well, we'll say let's look at it from different angles. First of all, those that are in the business and in the political space and CSOs are very excited that it's gone to Africa. They understand what this means, that right now it means Africa is being recognized. Africa is owning its space, particularly even tied it into what the president said Oslo. She said that, listen, that they're looking for partners. So that caliber of people, they're excited that yes, now Africa has found its voice. However, on the other side, the average Nigerian that might just be there are two sets of those people as well. There are those that understand a bit of what this means, and they're waiting for the declaration, trying to see if the declaration will mean anything different or will focus on Africa. And there are those that are not really concerned that G20 is just another talk shop and nothing really changes. So those are the categories of people we have here.
And to add to that, you find a number of young Nigerians who understand global politics, diplomatic relations, talking about it on social media, particularly excited about the fact that this is bold in Africa. We understand what it means for the African continent. And we're hopeful in Nigeria that maybe the next one will be Nigeria.
Yeah, so what? So what's the sense like in South Africa today? I can bet that it's been a very busy morning for you out there. Should I say the past 1 week has been very, very busy. Yesterday I saw the B20 meeting holding in South Africa. That is 20 top businesses in South Africa holding there. Well, what has it been like in South Africa? Let's get a feel of that as well.
It's been amazing for me. I've attended the social summit, and Peter, I found it incredible. The energy there, civil society were just really in control of that summit. And the fact that Olu and Oiza, we had a declaration that was handed over to President Cyril Ramaphosa. I thought that was great leadership, just in terms of what Y20, W20, C20, the rest of them, because they didn't hold back any punches in being critical of their governments. You know, the structures that they feel are holding them back in not only representing themselves but articulating their issues and moving forward with demands. South Africa's president being asked by the white regime to say, you've got the legislature down, you've got the policies, but now sign it into existence. Let's start working on it and implementing it.
Yeah, and just to add to that, it's actually been quite a year. Whilst these couple of days the leaders are here, a lot of the work has been done in the past 12 months. And about 2 months ago, I attended a youth business G20 summit. And it was great to see young people, young energy, business people in the G20 family coming together in the way that they did. So it's been a journey to get us to get to where we are today. I'm not 100% certain that all the citizens, ordinary citizens, fully understand the importance, fully embraced why the G20 is such a big thing. But I think, hopefully, the penny will drop the more that we have these conversations. And I guess it's the same in Nigeria.
It truly is. That's what I said. Some just look on us concerned, and they're like, okay, G20. Some people even ask you what's G20, but hey, it is. And that leads to the next question. I mean, I'm just wondering about this. That, listen, when you look at Africa, especially now that this summit has come to Africa, are we holding the right side of the stick? Because our strength in Africa are the youth. Are we doing enough to encourage them, to enlighten them about the G20 and the need to even work together better as Africans? Do you see any of that in this summit?
I think that there's been platforms, whether they are enough and included fully. Sometimes you give people a voice just so that it seemed to have been given to them, but whether it filters into final documents becomes the question. So we'll have to see what does play out. I'm curious as well, especially when we start to see the Gen Zs, youth movements across the continent. And you showed us in Nigeria, I remember Lekki Gate, for example, that young people now are not waiting for the leaderships that we're seeing here today at the G20 summit. They're saying, okay, that's what you say, that's what you believe, this is what we want, and if you don't give it to us, we're going to take it. And I think we're going to see a lot more of that kind of energy coming through. So if the G20 leaders don't hear, they will see.
I want to ask you, Oluweza, something, because as we're speaking about young people, there's a story that obviously we've been covering on Channel Africa, and that is the insecurity in Nigeria, the kidnappings, one at a government school where 25 girls were kidnapped, and the church that was attacked. When we talk about young people, what is their stance about the insecurity in the country and whether the government is doing enough, particularly to protect young women? It is something that really troubles me.
Okay, so I wanted to speak to what Peter said about young people in Africa regulating what goes on. So on one side, it does seem like there's a wave of, I don't want to call it rebellion, let me say protest moving through Africa, starting from Kenya, Ghana, Nigeria. But presently in Nigeria, it does seem like young people have relented, especially when you recall all that happened in 2020 after the protests and everything. But on insecurity, so it's quite dicey. I say dicey because there are different schools of thought of it. There is a school of thought that thinks the government is doing what it can, and there's the other part who thinks the government is not doing enough, especially when you cast your mind back to previous administrations of the opposition party, when the opposition party was in power, and how the present ruling party called them out on the insecurity
like, well, if you had the temerity to do this then, you felt like you could do what is right, why is the situation different now? And it's worse for women. In the prior incident, we had more women kidnapped, more girls kidnapped. There's been a recent one as well in Nigeria with more girls kidnapped. But we have to go on a break. We'll get back to you.
Okay, fantastic. Thanks so much indeed for joining us. That's our Nigerian brothers and sisters joining us on this joint broadcast, simulcast portion of this special broadcast this morning.
And that was Lagos Talks at the station, and the colleagues we were speaking to were Olu Wakayode, Iposu, and Oiza Yusuf.
All right. Right now, though, stand by because the news is next.
African Perspective.
Thank you, Peter. Top stories as how dignitaries arrive at Nasrec ahead of the G20 Leaders Summit in South Africa, and more than 220 students and staff abducted from a school in Nigeria. Good morning. Dignitaries have started arriving at the Nasrec Expo Centre in Johannesburg, South Africa for the G20 Leaders Summit. With the opening session expected at 10 o'clock Central African time, the summit is held under the theme Solidarity, Equality, Sustainability, marking the first time it is held on African soil. World leaders are expected to tackle urgent global issues ranging from debt relief and trade reform to climate finance and digital innovation. Our reporter Michael Mbewe joins us on the line from the venue. Michael, a hive of activity at Nasrec with dignitaries arriving. What is the latest from where you are? We seem to be having trouble connecting to our reporter, Michael Mbewe, who is at Nasrec. We will continue to give you rolling coverage on the G20. Moving on, President Cyril Ramaphosa says South Africa has leveraged from its historic G20 presidency to put Africa front and center on the global stage. Speaking to African heads of state and AU leaders in Sandton, Ramaphosa declared that the continent is now shaping and not just receiving the global development agenda, driving priorities like debt relief, of disaster resilience, just energy finance, and the critical minerals push. He announced that a new Africa expert panel is already working to amplify the continent's voice on debt investment and the cost of capital.
When we were honored to become the president of the G20, we used the G20 platform to promote the Africa 2063 agenda. We have sought to position Africa as a vital partner in advancing equitable development. We have advanced priorities such as disaster resilience, debt sustainability, finance for just energy transitions, and harnessing critical minerals for inclusive growth.
Meanwhile, the United Nations Secretary-General Antonio Guterres has paid tribute to the leadership of President Ramaphosa. He says he has put on the table all the issues that matter in relation to the needs, the financial and economic needs of developing countries in general and African countries in particular. Guterres was briefing the media in Johannesburg ahead of the G20 summit yesterday.
The G20 is an informal gathering that decides by consensus. And obviously, one of the reasons why I'm talking to you today is to put pressure on the G20 to do exactly the kind of reforms that are necessary for the perspectives of development and the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals in the African continent to become a reality.
The European leaders attending the G20 told the media yesterday they were left in the dark about the US 28-point plan to end the war in Ukraine. EU President Ursula von der Leyen says this issue will be discussed on the sidelines of the G20 as well as in Brussels, where EU leaders have been meeting. Ukraine has until Thursday to accept the plan. The draft plan is believed to tick too many boxes on Russia's wish list, comprising major territorial and military concessions. These include Ukraine ceding control of the entire mineral-rich Donbas region. Von der Leyen elaborates.
Yesterday, a 28-point plan was made public. We will discuss the situation both with European leaders and with leaders here in the sidelines of the G20. I will also reach out to President Zelensky to discuss the matter. Important is a key principle we have always upheld, and that is nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine.
And moving on to other news, the Catholic Association of Nigeria says gunmen have abducted more than 220 students and staff from a boarding school in Niger State. It's the third mass abduction in less than a week. The BBC's Anbarasan Itrajan has the details.
The Catholic Church in the Niger State said those abducted from St. Mary's School in Papiri included students, teachers and a security guard who was shot. Nigerian troops and police and other security agencies are searching for the students and staff taken by the armed gang members in a nearby forest. Some students managed to escape when the gunmen stormed the school. The nearby states of Katsina and Plateau have ordered all schools shut as a precautionary measure. The latest incident comes 3 days after several worshippers were kidnapped from a church in Kwara State.
Recapping the top story, the SAWA dignitaries have started arriving at the Nasrec Expo Centre in Johannesburg, South Africa for the G20 Leaders Summit. For any news stories you would like to share with us, please do send an email to newsroom@channelafrica.co.za or call us on +27 11 714 4459. For Channel Africa News, I'm Jolani Tulo-Wepe.
SABC News. The African Perspective. This weekend, South Africa will host the G20 Summit at the Nasrec Expo Center near Soweto. And Channel Africa will be right there to bring you live updates, interviews, and real-time insights from the main venue. And so, our regular lineup will be adjusted just a little bit for this weekend to accommodate the G20. On Saturday, the 22nd of November, the Oasis will broadcast for 2 hours. Out and About takes a break for a full look at the G20. After Africa Chart Toppers, our news and current affairs team will bring you special live broadcasts in 5 different languages directly from Nasrec. And normal programming will resume at 8 p.m. Central African Time. And then on Sunday, the 23rd of November, the Oasis will also broadcast for 2 hours. Tech Africa steps aside for our news and current affairs teams to bring you special live broadcasts in 5 different languages. Then, Planting the Seed resumes from 1 p.m. till 2 p.m. Central African Time. Channel Africa, your window to the continent, connecting you to the world in an African perspective. With gratitude for the voices, the rhythm, and the dreams that unite us all.
Roho ya Afrika inaishi katika kila hadithi tunayosimulia.
Each new day is a gift, a reminder to pause, to breathe, and to give thanks for the laughter we share and the journeys we take and the stories that shape who we are.
Cada nascer do sol, lembre-te algo pelo qual ser grato. La vie est un voyage, parcourons-la avec gratitude.
Channel Africa, celebrate the beauty of life with gratitude for the voices, the rhythms, and the dreams that unite us all. This is Africa with Channel Africa, the African perspective. Global leaders, African insights. Follow the G20 Summit with Channel Africa as it happens.
Welcome back to Nasrec, where we are bringing you this special broadcast right here on Channel Africa. And we always say we bring you the African perspective, and that's what we're going to be trying to do during the course of the next few hours. As we unpack what we hear in this room. A lot of it is going to be happening behind closed doors, unfortunately, but I think we can have conversations, certainly about African expectations. You will know that South Africa is the only African country in its own capacity as a member of the G20. But the African Union recently, in the last year or so, was included also as a full member of the G20, much like the European Union. So the African voice, in theory, is present in this grouping, and maybe with that, there's greater expectations in terms of what the G20 can do for the continent. So what we'll be doing is having a series of conversations with commentators and analysts, sharing their thoughts with us on various aspects of the G20 Leader Summit in particular. And right now we're going to be exploring the G20 Summit as it amplifies imperatives on the global stage, such as the themes that South Africa has been working on this year: solidarity, equality and sustainability, and hoping to elevate all of this to social justice and inclusion on the same level of urgency as macroeconomic and trade issues. And so it's not just about representation, it's also about transforming governance to reflect the voices and the needs of those that are historically marginalized. And whilst it might sound like just a Pan-African story, actually a lot of countries in the global south are grappling with the same issues. But to help us talk a little bit more about this summit, why it's so important, we're now joined by Dr. Telela Nethane Vika, who's the International Law Security Studies Global Governance Lecturer from Wits University School of Governance. Thank you so much indeed for joining us, and welcome.
Yes, welcome and good morning.
As you reflect and have been thinking about the G20 summit, the moment that we realized it was coming to South Africa, I wonder what your thoughts and expectations have been during the course of this year. We've seen a number of tracks, finance, business, social, you name it. It's happened, and we've got clues, periodically, statements, and it's culminated into where we are today. I wonder what your thoughts were at the beginning of the process, and now that we're here at the Leaders Summit, where do you think we are?
Yes, that's a very important question. As a South African and indeed an African, my thoughts were of a sense of pride, because symbolism matters, representation matters, and if we were to make any reforms, at least meaningful ones, within the global economic architecture, so you need voices from the South, and South Africa then having the opportunity to host. So from that point of view, as an African, it's a critical and important moment. But as an international law trade scholar, I had my own reservations, because these global bodies, they've got a tendency of talking, but how we get to the now and how those things will translate to a South African citizen in Qumbu or Richards Bay or Dakar in Senegal or Dar es Salaam in Tanzania, it becomes a totally different question. But that doesn't negate the importance of G20 in South Africa, so that we continuously put pressure on global institutions to say that, hey, you need to make the reforms. So there's that significance. And you can hear the skepticism is also embedded.
So when you talk about reform, you are a scholar of and have written about transformational leadership. And I want to take the G20 as a test study, right?
Yes.
How are we going to reflect transformational leadership that reflects African values, and not just Western governance paradigms, to steer the conversation around economic reform that's value-driven, that's inclusive, but also one that will guide in terms of economic diplomacy and decision-making. We've been talking about this being an African moment, a South African moment.
Yes. Thank you so much, Tsepiso, for that question. I guess yesterday I was actually reflecting when I saw the president hosting the dinner with African heads of state who have been invited. And I thought to myself, this is really an important moment also for all Africans in the continent and indeed in the diaspora. But it is also an important moment for those who are coming from the global south, and the symbolism of Brazil 2024, G20, and South Africa 2025. This is why then the social summit that flows from the C20 in Brazil is incredibly important, because what it does, it brings that element of initiatives and policy shaping that comes from the grassroots. Because if we were to change seriously and meaningfully these institutions, especially issues on debt, we really need to reflect the realities of the lived experiences of people of the South and indeed us as Africans. So we talk transformation. And South Africa, I guess, in how it's posturing the G20, it's posturing it from that very principle of Ubuntu, and it's trying to be as inclusive as possible. Hence, I'm saying that dinner yesterday was actually very symbolic and important, that he was hearing from voices of Africans before he can speak today. And one would imagine that they would have given one or two advices, and I hope they did.
Do you think that we've done enough work to get the voices of ordinary people to platforms like this?
Well, there's always work to be done, because if you're looking at the C20, it is strategic and it's one of the official, if you may, lobbying voices within the G20. And the assumption is that C20 comes from your non-government, NGOs, civil society. But we also know too well there is sometimes a distance between civil society and the actual citizens sitting somewhere. So you need to close that gap. But at least there is an intention. I attended quite a couple of these engagements. There is an intention, but you really need a lot to engage. And I think it must be a continuous exercise, even post G20. I mean, given all the challenges that we're dealing with.
So just looking from a legal governance perspective, what role and also what instruments are embedded within the G20, processes, but also its model that will ensure that there is accountability to these commitments that we are seeking to make on climate change, on development, on equality, etc., etc.
Yes, I mean, Tsepiso, that's a very important but yet very complex question. Because if you're looking at all these international bodies, or let me put it differently, the global governance architecture is complex because it's governed by soft law, international law. And then you've got issues and challenges around enforcement. You've got challenges around whether one member state would really, sort of implement what was decided. But what is even more complicated with bodies like the G20 is the fact that they've got a non-binding texture in them. And I guess you see the geopolitical dynamics in it. However, they are very, very significant, because decisions that are going to be taken here, and hopefully we'll be able to get to a point of a leader's declaration, because it's incredibly important. Those decisions will then continuously build onto the 2030 SDGs. It will continuously build, hopefully within the African continent, on the 2063 agenda. And we hope slowly we're able to shift things within the global economic system, because that is important. I mean, if you're dealing with economic issues, you really are challenged that you need to reform the debt, how we lend money, how money is lended to African states, and why African states, even those who are, for instance, making 5% economic growth in a year, but still have got high levels of poverty. What does that tell us? It tells us the disconnect between the global financial systems and the realities on the ground. Yes, it's important, but global systems are complicated.
I wonder often how much we can do ourselves. You talk about global payment systems. What if Africa said this is the African payment system, and that we don't need to be converting into US dollars, converting into Deutschmark, and increasing the cost of trade.
Yes, I mean that would be ideal, wouldn't it? And I'm taking liberties here. I'm traveling to Dakar next week, Monday. I'm speaking on the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, which really is whose aspirations are around that. I mean, one of the frustrations when you're traveling within the continent is to have to change to a dollar. And I mean, and the implications of that versus our currencies. So it would be ideal, but Africans through AU systems, and importantly the aspirations of the African Continental Free Trade Area, we should be moving towards that. But we also know too well we're dealing with challenges of fragmentation. I mean, you see the dynamics around the ECOWAS, you see the dynamics within SADC, the north regions. So it's an ideal, and I think we'll be making our ancestors very, very proud. Your Nyerere and Nkrumah would want us to be there. But is there the willingness? Sometimes I always feel that our African leaders have issues around egos other than saying, can we put aside everything? Because the European Union as a single market is actually telling us that a Schengen visa and which then mitigates a number of things. One, currency. Africans can't do that, and why?
So then, to follow up on that, if you were to make a recommendation just in terms of structural innovation for the global financial order, what would it be, just based on your research, and as you say, there's what is ideal and that what is possible?
Yes. I mean, I would start with the African Union, that it really needs to rethink deeply how it does coordination within the continent, because you need to go to global bodies as a solidified voice. Because if your voice is not solidified, even if the ideas in terms of, you know, the economic reforms and amongst others, and how you even trade amongst yourselves, but if that voice is fragmented, it diminishes it. So where I would start, I would be pleading with, you know, fellow Africans, especially our leaders who sit in these bodies, summit and whatever, that if they can get that right, it will take us closer. Because if you're looking at blocks like the Asian one, and also you're looking at the one that I've just made an example on, European Union, that's what they got right. Is it perfect? No. But at least they're able to go to anybody as a united voice, even within different voices within, but at least they are saying, within EU, this is what we agree upon. And we saw that even during COVID, how Africa was scrambling to deal with issues of vaccine amongst others, but other blocks were more coordinated, because you can have frameworks of the financial architecture, but you need to get the basics right here at home. So our leaders must really get to work and do what we expect them to do.
So historically, Africa has been the subject of rather than the shaper of global rules. How do we shift that?
Yes. Well, we can start with shaping it through the narrative. Narrative matters in the global space. But of course, you need something far more tangible than the narrative. Of course, narrative shapes policy. It shapes discourse. It shapes who also wants to invest in you or who doesn't want to invest. It also shapes who wants to trade with you, who doesn't want to trade. So there's value for the narrative, and Africans must lead that narrative very, very aggressively. But then the most important thing is that when we have opportunities like the G20, do we use it to the benefit of all of us? And I think President Ramaphosa is trying to do that in some way. Will it yield tangible results or not? Well, we'll only comment on tomorrow afternoon. You can ask me tomorrow afternoon.
Fingers crossed.
So let's pivot the conversation now to talk about gender equity and social justice. Well, there was a report that was handed over to President Ramaphosa by Professor Stiglitz following the research that they've done, which they say is groundbreaking. And as groundbreaking as it may be, it'll come down to actually drawing up policies that are not only implementable, but that will make a real change. Because we can't talk about sustainability without having a gendered lens, for instance, in terms of our energy mix. If we're talking about the global financial order, we know that the burden is far heavier on women than it is particularly on the African continent. Are you seeing signs of a commitment to that, or even reforms that will meet the needs that we face?
It's a mixed bag, Tsepiso and the listeners. Really, sometimes it saddens me. I've made a comment on a newspaper yesterday talking about that the gendered perspective in policy shaping, including South Africa and indeed within the continent, it has to be a really a topical matter, not only on the agendas, but how they think about it deeply. And because that thinking about deeply will translate into tangible policies. Because African societies, in the main, they've got more women. And, there's that African saying, you educate a woman, you educate the nation. I mean, you get the drill about it. So these bodies really need to take it seriously. But there are serious issues around, for instance, South Africa's macroeconomic framework, that whilst there is a commitment, at least from a political rhetoric point of view, that we want gender equality, and how does that find expression? I don't know whether you're talking about energy issues, you're talking about NHR, you're talking about poverty, you're talking about employment opportunities, you're talking about closing the disparities. It is the nitty-gritties that sometimes they get lost in the process. And if they can put their pulse on the nitty-gritties, when we talk on gender equality, how does it express itself? In South Africa's economic policy, how does it express itself in the African economies? How does it express itself in the global order? I think all societies are still challenged with that. I mean, looking at how countries are still battling to even elect a president who's a woman. It's a reflection of the broader, it's a microcosm of the broader issues on gender. But we must commend South Africa to some extent, to be fair to them. There is some good work that's happening here on gender equality. I'm busy now with a particular study looking at how JSE-listed companies are really placing women on roles. But my interest is not only them sitting on those roles, but are they given the power to be effective? Because sometimes we don't want to be ticked boxed. We want to be given the power. But I was seeing a very nice picture, but it needs to be interrogated very, very closely. So yes, at least South Africa is doing, and other countries are also doing well.
I'm curious about the themes that we've chosen: sustainability, equality, and solidarity. Your thoughts on that?
I mean, it's reflective of us, isn't it? We are born from as Africans, we are born from the altar of solidarity, and even bodies like the AU and the ones that preceded the AU, really. That's how we know ourselves to be. That's how our societies are also shaped. And I think it's coming from our history of colonialism and post-colonialism, with also dealing with complication. So it made sense to me that what else could we choose other than solidarity, Pan-African? It makes sense from that perspective. But each and every African, I suppose it's difficult to measure. One would hope that whatever comes out of the declaration and what would come, because we need many years of further development and enhancing also trade amongst ourselves as Africans, we hope that in few years we'll look back at this theme and say that, well, that theme maybe was something telling us of a dream that could be realized in few years. As it stands, it's an aspiration. So maybe it's enough for now to live with it as an aspiration. And then it becomes incumbent on all of us to do our part to realize that solidarity, which must continuously shape every African in every corner of this continent, because it's important to do so, isn't it?
So I'm curious about something. We, as you're talking about the declaration, Peter, has obviously been the coverage of the United States strongly telling South Africa, do not sign a declaration without the US being present. President Ramaphosa is very adamant that this G20 is going to come out of this with a declaration. So it's either a statement through the chair's statement, or perhaps it's in the language. But my question is, within the governance structures of the G20, this is obviously an unprecedented moment. Is there anything that prevents South Africa from doing that, especially if it says it's not going to hand over leadership to a mere charge d'affaires? Is there anything that prevents it from doing that?
No. If you're looking at the framework of the G20, the declaration, first and foremost, is not a South African declaration. It would be a leader's declaration. In other words, well, it would have been 2019. So you already have a quorum there in terms of the G20, the governance of the G20. And I think sometimes there's a conflating of the declaration as if it's South Africa's decision, it's South Africa's document. It isn't. Of course, when you're a host, you become the voice of that decision. But it would be the decision of all the processes and all the deliberations. And remember, G20 is not only about today and tomorrow. It's the culmination of what has been happening. Yes. Social summits, G20 is all the build-up. So yes, maybe the question, Tsepi, and the listeners that must be in our minds, whether then we will see a declaration that's being undermined, perhaps by the United then there will be a question of legitimacy. But for me, the fact that European leaders are here and others are here, maybe it's telling us something. I mean, somebody was saying to me yesterday, who knew that the League of Nations would end? Nobody knew, but it ended. So maybe we're seeing some reconfiguration of some kind in real time. I'm not saying it is, but who knows? You never know. The global order is a seriously evolving phenomenon all the time, and it teaches us moments of this evolution. But well, we'll see.
All right, sadly, that's where we're going to have to leave it. Thank you so much indeed for your powerful insights. And I like the thought that we can aspire to these things, because what it does, it gives us direction, and then it gives us something to strive for day by day. Thanks so much indeed for joining us.
Thank you so much. Dr. Talela Nqedani Vika, a legal and governance scholar at Fitz School of Governance. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. This weekend, South Africa will host the G20 Summit at the Nasrec Expo Center near Soweto. And real-time insights from the main venue. And so, our regular lineup will be adjusted just a little bit for this weekend to accommodate the G20. On Saturday, the 22nd of November, the Oasis will broadcast for 2 hours. Out and About takes a break for a full look at the G20. After Africa Chart Toppers, our news and current affairs team will bring you special live broadcast in 5 different languages directly from Nasrec. And normal programming will resume at 8 p.m. Central African Time. And then on Sunday, the 23rd of November, the Oasis will also broadcast for 2 hours. Tech Africa steps aside for our news and current affairs teams to bring you special live broadcast in 5 different languages. Then, Planting the Seed resumes from 1 p.m. till 2 p.m. Central African Time. Channel Africa, your window to the continent, connecting you to the world in an African perspective. The world is watching Johannesburg. Leaders from the planet's biggest economies gather to make decisions that shape nations, markets, and futures. You already know Channel Africa will be right there, bringing you the conversations, insights, and analysis that matter.
The best is yet to come.
The G20 Summit from the 22nd to the 23rd of November. As it happens, from an African perspective, stay tuned to Channel Africa and get all the G20 analysis. The G20 Summit through African eyes, live updates, and expert expert voices, only on Channel Africa.
And Channel Africa live today at the G20 Leaders Summit here at Nasrec, and we've been watching various leaders walk in through the flags as they enter the venue where the leaders will finally hold court. And we, that is myself and Peter, have been discussing quite a lot of what's on the agenda, what is possible, but we've also just been speaking about what consensus looks like. You've just heard from our guest, Dr. Telele, that the G20 operates by consensus. It's a single major holdout can block a leader's declaration being presented as a unanimous outcome. So meaning that if the leaders that are here, that are gathered here, agree and there is a declaration, there is nothing that the United States can do to stop it. So we'll be looking at the language that is calibrated to accommodate dissent. Concrete commitments on debt and development are more likely to take form on initiatives, task forces and invitations to negotiate further. So we will be unpacking that as the developments happen. But let's now go to our Kiswahili desk to hear what the perspective is from the African perspective. That's what Channel Africa is. We're joined by my colleague Ayam Henry Shekufu, who is presenter for the Kiswahili News and Current Affairs programs. Firstly, how have you been experiencing the G20?
To me, as you know, G20 being held in South Africa, as African women, I'm super excited. I'm super happy for this kind of G20 summit to be held in Africa.
All right, so we hand over to you now.
Thank you so much. Na msikilizaji wa Channel Africa popote pale ulipo, karibu kabisa katika wasaa mzuri wa kuweza kukuletea matangazo haya moja kwa moja kutoka Nasrec, Johannesburg hapa nchini Afrika Kusini, ambapo G20 inakuwa kwa mara ya kwanza ambaye ndio anakuwa amekuwa yeye kama ndio anamwalikwa na kuweza kuandaa mkutano huu mkubwa kabisa wa kimataifa. Lakini kubwa zaidi, tumefika hapa majira ya saa 1 asubuhi. Hali ilikuwa tulivu, wageni ni wengi kweli kweli, lakini zaidi ambalo nimelishuhudia ni kwamba ulinzi ni mkali kweli kweli kwa sababu ya namna viongozi mbalimbali ambavyo wanafika hapa. Kwa hiyo kumekuwa kuna namna ya kukucheki mara mbili kwamba uko sawa, nini kinaendelea, umetokea wapi. Japo tayari tuna utambulisho kuwepo hapa, lakini bado wamekuwa kuna ule uhakiki. Lakini kubwa zaidi ambalo nimelishuhudia hapa ni kwamba namna ambavyo ukumbi ulivyopambwa, mandhari ilivyo, watu wana furaha na bashasha kweli kweli kuhusiana na mkutano huu. Lakini zaidi ambalo ni jambo jipya ambalo tumelipata dakika 10 zilizopita, ambalo ndio gumzo kwa sasa, naweza nikasema kama ndio breaking news, ya kwamba Marekani ule ujumbe wao mdogo ambao walikuwa wameuleta hapa, wamezuiliwa kupewa utambulisho wao kuweza kuhudhuria. Kwa hiyo tujajua kwa nini na nini, lakini baadaye kwa sababu niko hapa nitawaletea hayo yote kutoka hapa Nasrec, msikilizaji. Lakini kwa wewe ambaye ndio kwanza unajiunga nami na pengine huelewi hii G20 ilianzia wapi, ni kwamba G20 ni kundi ambalo lilianzishwa mwaka 1999 ili kuweza kukabiliana na msukosuko wa kifedha katika bara la Asia, lakini pia iliweza kununuliwa hadi kwenye mkutano wa kilele wa viongozi kwa mwaka wa 2008 wakati wa mgogoro wa kifedha duniani. Lakini pia tangu wakati huo imebadilika na kuwa jukwaa la ushirikiano wa kiuchumi wa kimataifa, lakini pia ajenda ambayo inapanuka zaidi kifedha na kujumlisha masuala mengi ya kimataifa, hasa katika ukanda wa nchi za Ulaya na zile nchi ambazo zimeendelea kiuchumi. Na kikubwa kingine ni kwamba pia hapa nchini Afrika Kusini zaidi ya mataifa na mashirika 40 kufika hapa Johannesburg katika mkutano huu wa viongozi wa G20, lakini pia tumeweza kukaribisha G20 na kuleta manufaa makubwa kabisa ya kiuchumi katika nchi hii ya Afrika Kusini. Lakini kubwa zaidi pia kuna hii hapa taarifa ambayo imeandaliwa na mwenzangu kule studioni, ambapo tunaambiwa kwamba na sasa tukasikilize maoni ya wananchi wa kawaida ambao wametoa mtazamo yao kuhusiana na mkutano wa kilele wa G20 ambao unaendelea hapa nchini Afrika Kusini, na wao wanachukuliaje mkutano huu, matarajio yao ni yapi na umuhimu wake katika taifa la Afrika Kusini na bara la Afrika kiujumla. Mwenzangu Manase bin Bendera ametukusanyia maoni haya.
Habari za wakati huu msikilizaji. Jina langu naitwa Manase bin Bendera nikiwa katika jiji la Johannesburg, ambako leo tunazungumza na wananchi wa kawaida kuhusu mkutano wa kilele wa G20 unaoendelea hapa Afrika Kusini. Tunataka kujua wananchi wanaochukuliaje mkutano huu, matarajio yao na umuhimu wake kwa taifa la Afrika Kusini na Afrika kwa ujumla. Karibu ufuatilie maoni yao. Hapa nimekutana na mwananchi ambaye amejitambulisha kwa jina la Chris Kashindi. Chris Kashindi, ningetaka kujua wewe unajua nini kuhusu G20?
Asante sana ndugu mtangazaji. G20 ni kundi la mataifa 20 yenye uchumi mkubwa zaidi duniani pamoja na Ulaya, na lengo kuu la G20 ni kujadili na kuratibu sera za kiuchumi, kifedha na maendeleo ya kimataifa kwa ujumla. Hiyo ndo G20, yani G20.
Mkutano huu wa kilele wa G20 umefanyika barani Afrika kwa mara ya kwanza. Unafikiri ni kwa nini ni muhimu kwa mkutano wa G20 kufanyika kwa mara ya kwanza barani Afrika?
Ni hatua ya ishara kwanza. Kitu cha kwanza naweza nikasema inaonyesha kuwa Afrika inapata nafasi ya kuingizwa zaidi kwenye majadiliano ya viwango vya juu vya uchumi na siasa duniani. Inatoa fursa ya kuweka masuala ya bara wala madeni, nishati, ubadilishaji na miundombinu pamoja na kwenye ajenda ya viongozi wakuu.
Ni fursa gani ambazo bara la Afrika linaweza kupata kutokana na kuandaa mkutano huu?
Fursa ambazo bara la Afrika linaweza likapata ni kuwa kama vile uwekezaji wa miundombinu ya muda mrefu kama vile barabara, bandari, nishati, upatikanaji wa ufadhili wa mradi na fursa za mazungumzo ya moja kwa moja katika nchi za Afrika na mataifa makubwa zaidi.
Kwa upande wake wa Enwa Asumani J, ambaye ni mwandishi wa vitabu na mwanaharakati, ana maoni tofauti kabisa na Chris Kashindi.
Asante ndugu mtangazaji kunishirikisha ndani ya kipindi chako. Nikiwa kama mwandishi wa vitabu na mwanaharakati, kufanyika huku kwa mkutano wa G20 hapa barani Afrika, naona wamebadili tu eneo la kufanyia mikutano. Lakini sio kwamba bara la Afrika limepiga hatua wala watu kulifikiria kuwa jambo la ajabu sana, bali watu wachukulia kawaida tu. Kuja huku kwa mkutano wa G20 barani Afrika, sifikiri kwamba italeta sura mpya. Kwa nini? Hawa tunaowaita wawekezaji wanaokuja kuwekeza barani Afrika, kuliko kuwa wawekezaji, wao wanageuka kuwa waporaji. Wao ndo wanachangia tena pakubwa kuharibu amani ya bara la Afrika. Wao ndo wanaanza tena kusapoti hata makundi ya waasi ili kuharibu usalama wa Afrika, kama ajira kwa vijana. Unakuja kukuta kuna mambo mengi sana ambayo yanafanyika na kuwatumia vijana katika njia zisizo halali. Kwa hiyo mimi kwa upande wangu sidhani kabisa kama huu mkutano wa G20 unaweza ukawa na faida kubwa sana kwa watoto wa Afrika.
Sasa nirudi kwako Chris. Baada ya mkutano huu, unadhani Afrika itakuwa katika nafasi gani kwenye siasa za dunia? Na kwa mtazamo wako, ni changamoto gani kubwa Afrika inapaswa kushughulikia kabla ya mkutano unaofuata?
Kwa mtazamo wangu ni kuwa kukaa meza moja na mataifa makubwa ya kiuchumi inaweza kushiriki moja kwa moja kwenye maamuzi ya uchumi wa dunia inaweza kulinda maslahi yake kwenye masuala ya biashara, madeni, mabadiliko ya tabia nchi. Hawezi kuwa maamuzi makubwa kufanywa bila Afrika kusikilizwa.
Kwa upande wako wa Enwa Asumani J, wewe una matarajio gani?
G20 sio ambayo utasaidia kuleta mustakabali wa bara la Afrika. Umoja wa Afrika ndio unatakiwa ulete mustakabali wa bara la Afrika. Endapo mpaka sasa unashindwa kusaidia Waafrika, ina maana kwamba bado kuna tatizo kwenye umoja wa Afrika.
Yes.
Wengi maamuzi ya G20, dunia haiendi popote. Itaendelea kuwa hivi ilivyo tu. Wenye nguvu wataendelea kufanya wale wanayojisikia kufanya, na wala hawezi wakazuiwa na mtu.
Hayo yalikuwa ni baadhi ya maoni ya wananchi wa kawaida niliyokutana nao kutoka mitaa ya jiji la Johannesburg. Mimi ni Manas bin Bendera, Channel Africa, habari.
Asante sana Manase bin Bendera.
Channel Africa, habari.
Asante sana Manase bin Bendera kutoka huko Auckland Park katika studio zetu za Channel Africa idhaa ya Kiswahili kwa kuweza kutukusanyia maoni mbalimbali. Na msikilizaji, naamini kabisa umeweza kuwasikiliza wasikilizaji kwa namna ambavyo shauku, maoni na matarajio katika mkutano huu mkubwa kabisa wa mataifa yaliyoendelea kiuchumi ulimwenguni. Na kikubwa zaidi, mimi niko hapa na niko tayari kabisa, na katika skrini hapa nikimuona rais wa Afrika Kusini Cyril Ramaphosa akiwasili katika viunga hivi vya Nasrec hapa Johannesburg, Afrika Kusini. Mimi nikushukuru sana msikilizaji, na baadaye tena tutakutana nasi hapa kupitia idhaa ya Kiswahili ya Channel Africa live kutoka Nasrec. Nitakuletea mengi zaidi bila kificho, bila upendeleo, hapa Channel Africa. Asante.
This weekend, South Africa will host the G20 Summit to bring you live updates, interviews, and real-time insights from the main venue. And so, our regular lineup will be adjusted just a little bit for this weekend to accommodate the G20. On Saturday, the 22nd of November, the Oasis will broadcast for 2 hours. Out and About takes a break for a full look at the G20. After Africa Chart Toppers, our news and current affairs team will bring you special live broadcasts in 5 different languages directly from Nasrec. And normal programming will resume at 8 p.m. Central African Time. And then on Sunday, the 23rd of November, the Oasis will also broadcast for 2 hours. Tech Africa steps aside for our news and current affairs teams to bring you special live broadcasts in 5 different languages. Then, Planting the Seed resumes from 1 p.m. till 2 p.m. Central African Time. Channel Africa, your window to the continent, connecting you to the world in an African perspective. The G20 Summit, through African eyes, live updates, and expert voices, only on Channel Africa.
And it is now 14 minutes to 10. You are watching, listening to Channel Africa's live broadcast at the G20 Summit. And you'd remember that we've been speaking about the fact that there have been previous G20 meetings, working groups by ministers, Sherpas, civil society leaders and economic experts. In fact, pretty much everybody who is anybody. And therein lies the rub, isn't it? That do you have to be part of these elite circles to be represented and to be part of these discussions on the G20? Well, that's something that we've been asking, but we know that there are very important people who are going to make very important decisions here, and we've just been mentioning that debt is central to the G20 priority under South Africa's presidency. So the ways in which that can be reformed, the systems in particular, something we'll talk about later on. But here's a fun G20 fact. So shall we tell you about that? And this time we look at this, that the G20's presidency rotates annually, focusing on fostering solidarity, equality and sustainability in global economic and financial challenges. No government secretariat or staff exists. Instead, work is done through various engagement groups and supported by international organizations like the World Bank. And we have seen the leaders of some of those international financial institutions walk down that aisle where the leaders are coming through here at the G20 and at Nasrec Expo Center. So we're joined now by Lebo Changela, our producer at SABC Digital News. We once again look at what is central to conversation on social media level. So perhaps let's just start with what platforms you're looking at and what you're noticing.
Good morning, Tsepiso, and good morning to your listeners. I'll be looking at X, and there is various opinions on the G20 summit, but people are saying that they're very proud of Cyril Ramaphosa for staging such a huge event. Some are even saying that, we're not going to criticize him for the duration, of the summit. We'll deal.
That is so South African. That is so South African. I was talking to somebody and they were saying something. I said, there's one thing you need to understand, and somebody said this on social media, that don't come for a South African because a South African will be protected by other South Africans. So what else are you seeing?
And obviously, they continue to say that let's not focus on Trump. It's got nothing to do with Trump. And they're calling Ronald Lamola a black diamond. And also, a lot of people are also asking, what is going to be the benefit of this G20 summit to an ordinary people? And also even to Africa, what is it going to do for us? Trump is not here. The Chinese president is not here. So exactly what are they going to lecture us on fossil fuel? Are they going to just give us some relief fund? What is it in it for Africa? And people are stressing that poverty should actually be central to the conversation. Poverty, is a reality. And some even criticizing, saying that all of them are arriving in jumbo jets, and no doubt, will they just talk about climate change? So people are there's a mixed emotions about what people are actually basically saying on social media.
And just in terms of President Cyril Ramaphosa's currency, do you get a sense that it is increasing? Because people are saying they're proud of him for staging such a big event, and I think a lot of people can say he's shown true leadership and standing up to, staring down the United States. There's been certainly a lot of support, given that White House aide who spoke about President Cyril Ramaphosa, quote unquote, running his mouth. A lot of people showed umbrage. They felt he was disrespected.
Oh yes, his currency has grown because even people are saying that we will not be bullied as South Africa. So they're saying that for the first time that he's being decisive about where we stand, that we will continue with the G20 despite the US being there, and also standing up to they call it colonist, the West, telling up to the West and refusing to be bullied by them. So they say that he is showing leadership, and certainly his currency is growing because people are expressing that they're proud of him and wishing him well.
And just tell me finally, what are expectations? Do people understand this whole issue around a declaration and whether or not there will be one? As you know, the spat with Washington has been that Washington has given President Ramaphosa an instruction that he cannot hand over the G20 leadership to the US with a declaration because they're not here. And well, guess what? They have chosen not to be here. They did a last minute about turn. We're speaking now to a colleague who's saying the news is that the American delegation has actually been shut out of entering Nasrec because they obviously don't have accreditation. Has that made it to the social media yet?
Definitely. Was it Lamola that said that? We can't be listening to people that are not here telling us what to do with the declaration or not. They're not here to speak for themselves, And also even was it Nchabeni saying that the sun will still continue to rise whether they are here or whether they're not, And also Vincent Magwenya, the presidency spokesperson, say that how do they send a junior to come receive, the handover? Do you get what I'm saying? That's like they're just undermining them,
Lebo, I've been talking about this and I thoroughly enjoyed it. The social summit. It was just being part of that wave of excitement, of determination. There was a lot of singing. There was a lot of dancing. And colleagues of mine from one from the US, one from Geneva, and they were just saying that, I want to come live in South Africa. You people just are always dancing, but it's happy dancing, and it lifts the spirit. And there was a sense of that there were serious issues on the table by, the delegates. But there was the strong sense of not only solidarity in those issues and their various tracks, but with the South African government. The speakers, various speakers, AU, former Deputy President of South Africa, Mephumzile Mlambo-Ngcuka, they were all saying a common refrain. Was quite fascinating. They kept on saying very bad things are happening in South Africa. And obviously it said as a jibe. And you should have seen the energy in the room of people just, loving that, the big birdie to the US, so to speak.
Even as a member of the media, you couldn't help but dance to the beat, because there's just so much cultural, dancers, people wearing their attires, You couldn't just help it, but when you hear the African drum, but to just dance.
It's almost like it's galvanizing you to...
Even the selection of the song, I mean, they're taking you back, to the times when, there were Mango Groove, PJ Powers, they...
Liquid Blue, I remember the song by ES.
Oh, definitely. People, I spoke to a couple of people at the social summit, and one of the questions I asked them was that, do you think this will actually come to fruition during this summit? And they're saying that we live in hope. That's the thing about us South Africans. We sing, we spur ourselves on in song and all of those things. There are challenges, but we don't give up hope, and we never miss an opportunity to dance, to make light of the opportunity. Just being there, it felt like a 2010 moment.
Didn't it just?
Oh, yes.
And what I absolutely loved about it is South Africa is a member of the G20, but South Africa has consistently been there as an African participant. How it has framed its role in the G20 has always been about bringing along African brothers and sisters, and it just gave me that, those goosebumps in that I'm so glad that we're not focusing on the negative, that of Afrophobia, so-called xenophobia, that we are united in these things that we're calling for, and showing that leadership as a collective, as Africa and the global South.
Yes, that's what the president's saying, is that it's an African event. You know what I'm saying? Africa is here. They are representing the problems of Africa. If South Africa succeeds, Africa succeeds. It's the first time that this event is on African soil. Do you know what I'm saying? So it's an African party. We all need to pull this trolley together, as Africa.
And that's what we continue doing, Zauragela Pambili. And we ended the social media trending feature with Lebo just giving us an update on what's happening. Lebo Tangela is producer at SABC Digital News. And we wrap up this hour now. We will be speaking to the South African Government Communications spokesman William Baloi in the next hour. And as we wait for President Cyril Ramaphosa's opening address, we'll also bring you analysis on the developments leading up to this G20 and what is to come out of the Leaders Summit meeting here at Nasrec, South Africa, in Johannesburg. And just a quick one to reflect on, Labo, when you were speaking about the issue of poverty, I wanted actually to go back to that extraordinary committee of independent experts on global inequality. So they have issued a report. The report was authored by that committee, led by Joseph Stiglitz, joined by Adriana Abdener, Winnie Byanyima, Jayati Ghosh, Imran Valodia, and Wanga Zembe Nkabile. So it was looking at the state of inequality across the world, looking at the scale of the inequality emergency, why inequality matters, and what are the drivers of high levels of inequality. And that is something we will definitely zoom into, because the questions have been, as you heard Lebo say, South Africans are asking, what will this G20 do for us? What will it change in terms of our lives, our status, either as a developing country, whether you're in South Africa, whether you're in Nigeria, whether you are in Botswana, Malawi? How is this going to trickle down to us, the ordinary man on the street, the decisions, the declarations that are going to be made by the G20 leaders? Well, we leave it here for now. Peter and I will be back in just a moment. Time now for the news. Ralani Tulo has those details.
Thank you, Sibiso.
African perspective.
Thank you, Tsepiso. Top stories. Asawa, South Africa's president expected to open the G20 summit shortly, and Brazil's COP30 climate summit runs into extra time. Good morning. South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa is expected to officially open the G20 Leaders Summit at the Nasrec Expo Centre in Johannesburg shortly. Issues including debt inequality and climate finance are expected to dominate the agenda. Meanwhile, police say they've deployed more officers to the venue of the summit to ensure safety of hundreds of delegates, including heads of state and government, at the first G20 summit in Africa. The Deputy National Police Commissioner, Tibello Musikidi.
Yesterday, we were at Tshwane. The National Commissioner and the Minister of Police were at Tshwane, welcoming more than 3,500 new police constables. They are on the ground. We have augmented and supplemented, because that is why they were recruited to be in the police. Very few of them will go on leave or they will go on their rest days, but the rest are here.
We are now crossing live to our reporter Michael Mbewe, who is at the Nasrec Expo Centre. Michael, what is happening where you are?
Good morning, Sholo, and good morning to our listeners across the continent of Africa and the globe. Yes, it's time now for the South Africa's G20 presidency, which takes place when the world is facing a series of overlapping and mutually reinforcing crises, including climate change, underdevelopment, inequality, poverty, hunger, unemployment, technological changes, and geopolitical instability, underscoring the urgency of the situation. So to tackle these global crises, South Africa has embraced the theme solidarity, equality, sustainability for its presidency. So yes, it's all systems go, and at the moment, the president is receiving all the heads of states, and after that, he will be now addressing the plenary. Reporting from Nasrec in Johannesburg, I am Michael Mbewe for Channel Africa.
And in news just in, the spokesperson to South Africa's Minister of International Relations and Cooperation, Crispin Piri, says they've marked the U.S. delegation absent from the ongoing G20 summit. Speaking on the sidelines of the summit at the Nasrec Expo Centre in Johannesburg, he says they have also rejected the U.S.'s proposal for President Cyril Ramaphosa to hand over the G20 presidency to its acting ambassador. Meanwhile, President Ramaphosa says South Africa has leveraged from its historic G20 presidency urgency to put Africa front and centre on the global stage. Speaking to African heads of state and AU leaders in Sandton, Ramaphosa declared that the continent is now shaping and not just receiving the global development agenda, driving priorities like debt relief, disaster resilience, just energy finance, and the critical minerals push. He announced that a new Africa expert panel is already working to amplify the continent's voice on debt investment and the cost of capital.
When we were honored to become the president of the G20, we used the G20 platform to promote the Africa 2063 agenda. We have sought to position Africa as a vital partner in advancing equitable development. We have advanced priorities such as disaster resilience, debt sustainability, finance for just energy transitions, and harnessing critical minerals for inclusive growth.
And finally, the United Nations Climate Change Conference in Brazil has overrun into extra time as no final agreement has been reached yet. Negotiations have deadlocked as the outcome of Brazil's COP30 climate summit hangs in the balance. The European Union is refusing to accept a draft deal it said would fail to advance global efforts to curb greenhouse gas emissions, driving climate change. The BBC's Justin Rowlett has the details.
Given fossil fuels are the main driver of climate change, surely it shouldn't be controversial to mention them in the final text of the world's main climate summit, not least because the need to phase them out was agreed at a COP 2 years ago. But a group made up of fossil fuel producing countries and their allies, including Saudi Arabia, is understood to have been refusing even to discuss the words being mentioned. Meanwhile, countries led by the European Union is equally adamant they should be included. If a compromise can't be found, there is a risk the conference could fail and call into question the entire COP process itself.
And recapping the top story this hour, South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa is expected to officially open the G20 Leaders Summit at the Nasrec Expo Centre in Johannesburg shortly. For any news stories you would like to share with us, please do send an email to newsroom@channelafrica.co.za or call us on +27 11 714 4459. For Channel Africa News, I'm Jolani Tulo-Wepe.
SABC News. The African Perspective. This weekend, South Africa will host the G20 Summit at the Nasrec Expo Center near Soweto. And Channel Africa will be right there to bring you live updates, interviews, and real-time insights from the main venue. And so, our regular lineup will be adjusted just a little bit for this weekend to accommodate the G20. On Saturday, the 22nd of November, the Oasis will broadcast for 2 hours. Out and About takes a break for a full look at the G20. After Africa Chart Toppers, our news and current affairs team will bring you special live broadcasts in 5 different languages directly from Nasrec. And normal programming will resume at 8 p.m. Central African Time. And then on Sunday, the 23rd of November, the Oasis will also broadcast for 2 hours. Tech Africa steps aside for our news and current affairs teams to bring you special live broadcasts in 5 different languages. Then, Planting the Seed resumes from 1 p.m. till 2 p.m. Central African Time. Channel Africa, your window to the continent, connecting you to the world in an African perspective. Global leaders, African insights. Follow the G20 Summit with Channel Africa as it happens.
Stand by.
With Channel Africa.
Stand by. Okay, welcome back. We are at Nasrec in Johannesburg. It's south of Johannesburg, Soweto. And this is the venue for the Leader Summit, G20 Leader Summit 2025. And it's been under the presidency and the leadership of South Africa for this past year. And it is coming to an end, its tenure. And depending on who you talk to, by and large, I think South Africa can be very proud of its leadership. Questions will be asked about certain aspects, and depending on the declaration tomorrow, if there is one, maybe people then will measure exactly how successful the year has been. But certainly the engines have been running, the meetings have been taking place, the tracks have been doing what they do, and this week has been a busy one to try and dot the T's and put the I's on what could be agreements. And in amongst all of that, of course, there's always drama and protest, defiance, and relationships stress tested, and no more so than the one between South Africa and the United States. Some would say its origins has been the South Africa taking Israel to the International Court of Justice, and then Donald Trump decides that a genocide is happening in South Africa. White Afrikaners are being targeted, and he then allowed them into the country. So what does he do when G20 is happening? He says, I'm not coming. I'm not even sending anybody actually there. And then he makes threats. He says, hang on, you guys can carry on, but don't think you can come up with anything substantial without me. All right, let's try and make sense of all of this. And what does the G20 mean with or without the United States? We've heard the Minister of Foreign Affairs in South Africa saying that the show goes on. Well, Brooks Spector is a former diplomat himself. He's a journalist, a writer, commentator, international relations expert, and he joins us now. Brooks, always good to talk to you. Where does one start? It's significant that the US as a country is not here, or is it?
Well, it's good to be with you, Peter. It's we're at the beginning of, well, in one sense we're right in the middle of it, but in another sense, of course, we're right at the beginning. I say middle because the people who are not the heads of government have already been meeting for some days, some weeks, in some cases for some of the groupings, some months perhaps, to establish what would go into a final declaration or joint communique or chairman's notes, depending on how this works out. And there are people who argue this is a hinge moment for international, global, and financial issues. Remember, the G20 arose out of the G8, now G7, as a result of international financial issues. Various crises made it clear that the biggest nations had to come together to have a better, more sustained relationship. And as a result of that, it became clear that a wider net had to be cast, hence the G20. Now, what happens in this is that the debate takes place. But remember, it's not a global police force. It is not an administrative body. It is not an executive decision-making enterprise. It relies on and requires consensus and agreement. And that means that the negotiation has to include countries who disagree on things. In some cases, pretty fundamentally. And my easy example, of course, is between fossil-producing nations and those countries who feel deeply affected by the potential of global warming and climate change as a result of the burning of fossil fuels. So there are areas that are immediately visible as possible debates. Paradoxically, and this has come to me in the last little while, the fact that the United States is not going to be present in the debate and the discussion and the leaders' meetings means that it may simply be easier to reach the consensus because the U.S. government, at least in its present administration as president, stands in disagreement with many of the ideas that have been espoused by the South African president and others. And if that's the case, it may actually be easier to reach a kind of consensus as a statement, and then let the United States decide in what way, shape, or form it agrees to accept or pay no attention to. But ultimately, everything that is said here will depend on individual governments saying, not only did we agree, but we are going to take steps to do X or Y or Z. And that is where it translates from being a nice piece of paper to actual action. And that's a much more difficult road than even reaching the piece of paper.
Is Donald Trump feeling a little isolated because everyone's here and he's not? So it might have been bravado and he might have thought he's making a statement, but in the end, the show has gone on.
Well, actually, not everybody is here. I mean, his best buddy or bête noire, depending on how you think about it, Vladimir Putin, of course, is not going to attend.
Yes. Not physically, but there's a representation.
There'll be, but the representative is fairly low on the pecking order. So they've made something of a decision about how they're playing this. The Chinese president is not coming. His premier, number 2, is. And the Mexican president, for other reasons of state, is not coming. But what Donald Trump, I kept thinking that Donald Trump, because he's never met a microphone he doesn't love, and this is a very large microphone, let's be honest, that ultimately he would decide, despite disagreeing with some of the basic concepts, he would eventually show up, or at the minimum, send his vice president, who was in fact supposed to come, but now is not. And it's now devolved into a bit of a back and forth as to whether or not the current head of the embassy will show up as an observer or as the recipient of the passing of the torch ceremonially or whatever is going to happen. But keep in mind that Donald Trump, although he is not here, he's having an effect on the meeting because we're all talking about the fact that he's not here. And add to that, in the middle of all this, he is trying to build a consensus with European leaders about his peace plan for dealing with the Russian invasion of Ukraine. So he has inserted himself without having to get on an airplane.
And he's certainly done that for sure. Diplomatically, where does this leave South Africa and the US in particular?
Yeah, interesting question, Peter. I mean, it's going to evolve over time. The one thing I'd like to tell people, and I've done it, you probably heard me say it, that the good news about the U.S.-South Africa relationship is it is not solely and entirely a government-to-government relation. There are hundreds of American companies that have presences in South Africa. I mean, I went to part of what was the B20, which was the Business 20 parallel group. I went to something hosted by the American Chamber of Commerce. And I was told by various American business people they were delighted to be party to a discussion with South African, other African, and other foreign business leaders. There were 3,000 or so people there. And the second largest delegation, besides the largest besides South Africa, so the second largest delegation, was American business people, which means that they saw it as an opportunity. Now you add business, but then you add all of the cultural ties and connections, all of the NGO involvement in South Africa, all the tourism, and you have a much more layered, more textured relationship, even when the two administrations do not see eye to eye and, engage in something of a squabble. And it's going to take some time to heal this squabble because, in large part, as per your introduction, it's based, at least from the American side, it's based on a false narrative. But that false narrative, this white genocide business with the Afrikaner farmers all being dragged off and killed, is not simply a two-country question. He's playing, that is, Donald Trump is playing to his support base in the U.S. And so, in part, it's a domestic question. And I remind you that much of his support comes from middle and lower middle class, working class white Americans who feel that they have been shunted aside by the future, in effect. And I add one more thing, which people tend to forget. What did he say about Nigeria a couple of weeks ago?
Yeah.
Right? That they are killing the Christians.
Yeah, yeah.
And so Donald Trump is positioning himself as the defender of persecuted, in some cases white, but in some cases just Christians generally. And that's a very specific kind of domestic agenda as well. So in effect, South Africa is a collateral damage to this thought.
But if a declaration does come out tomorrow...
We're back to G20 now,
yes,
aren't we?
Yes,
okay,
G20.
Good. Thank you.
If a declaration does come out tomorrow, does that take away something from the US, though?
It can. It depends a lot on what the content is. If it says that there needs to be an entirely, just wool gathering here, entirely new international financial architecture, that the World Bank and the IMF and the World Trade Organization are all creatures of yesteryear and we need an entirely new arrangement, the Americans are not going to agree with it, but the Europeans won't agree with that either. So that's unlikely. What you're going to see, I think, is disagreements around the margins of what's proposed. There will be calls in this statement or declaration or chairman's notes or whatever the texture is going to be, which is going to talk about changes in the way what we used to call the third world debt is structured and paid and dealt with. There will be calls for easier, better, more equitable, whatever that may mean, investment. Some Americans will be very happy with that, because it will mean more opportunities, especially if it includes stronger prohibitions against corruption and theft and special finagling that can happen with these kinds of investments. So we are all questioning what the texture is going to look like in this declaration. The tripwire, I think, is going to be the moment it says something like fundamental change in X. And that's where the Americans may find some serious difficulty with whatever comes out.
Yeah. What about people like Macron and the challenges that they have with the continent? G20 is seen as Africa setting itself up in some ways to have a bigger share of voice and deal with things like debt and climate change.
Keep in mind that what Donald Trump has said about next year's G20, he thinks this is too big. There are too many people involved, too many players, too many voices. It needs to shrink back in some way, shape, or form. He also said rather provocatively that he's not convinced South Africa should be party to it.
Wow.
Because in the economic sense, it doesn't fit the rest of the countries involved. Remember, South Africa was added to the G20 group partly because of its sophisticated financial and economic circumstances, but also as a way of balancing the regions involved in the G20 in the first place. When the small informal group, the Germans, the Canadians, the Americans, the Treasury or finance ministers set this up, they said, wait a minute, we need to pick countries that represent the globe. I know this is radio and I'm drawing a big circle, for the globe. Because there is no central secretariat and there is therefore no administrative continuity, the next chair, host country, gets to set some of this texture and agenda, and that's presumably the United States, unless some revolutionary thing happens and it's moved to another country, which I don't think will happen. But then there'll be some harder choices about who gets to come as members, as observers, as participants, as whatever.
Yeah. Is Africa's voice louder here at G20 2025?
Well, a couple things are true. When I went to this business event, one of the speakers was the Secretary General for the Africa Comprehensive Free Trade Association, and he was making the pitch that we're getting our act together. We're beginning to see results. We're beginning to speak, if not with one voice, with a whole lot fewer voices. This year's G20 has the African Union as a participating member, remember, in the same way that the European Union, the European Commission, is a member.
Yeah.
It's unlikely that those two bodies will be uninvited next year, which means that to the extent to which Africa is still a participant, it's not going to disappear, in part for two interesting reasons. One is the sheer weight of the population on the continent. By most estimates, there'll be 1.4 billion people on the continent. If you're a business person, that is an extraordinary opportunity, especially if you're marketing or building or making products that younger people on the continent is a young continent, not geologically, but obviously in human terms. Those are opportunities. But the second part of this is Africa remains a store of important mineral and other material resources that the world wants and needs, whether it's the factories in Shenzhen in China, or whether it's the people designing the newest computer applications in Cupertino, California. It doesn't matter. Those things are still important and will become more so. So all those factors grouped together mean that, to me at least, that the African voice is not going to decrease, but it's going to be up to African nations and African leaders and African thinkers to explain why we should be part of this discussion going forward.
What should be in President Ramaphosa's speech, do you think, that is going to deliver?
Oh, Peter, he didn't ask me to be a speechwriter. He did not ask. I volunteered, but he didn't ask.
Maybe another way of asking is, can he be proud of the journey that South Africa has taken this year?
For this particular? Look, it looks well organized. The media center seems to be well run and competently staffed, and there aren't vast complaints. We'll know by lunchtime just how well it's organized. When the food is delivered and the journalists who are known for this kind of thing set siege to the food, to the feed. But I think that he will be able to say, despite all the ructions, that this was a successful event. The question, of course, is going to come when he turns over the symbolic gavel to the U.S. and if there is someone there to take it.
And he said that he's not going to give it to a junior official, though, isn't he?
Well, I take umbrage with this phrase, junior official. I mean, the chargé d'affaires ad interim is not a junior official.
Okay, he's the representative of the country.
He's the senior representative of the United States here.
However, you've seen in previous years president to president.
But remember, Peter, not every country has presidents here. I mean, the Russians don't, the Chinese don't. Mexico doesn't, a couple of other countries don't. Indonesia's president, Prabowo Subianto, is not coming. Partly because countries, heads of government, have lots of manifold responsibilities and demands on their time. And what amounts to a 4-day chunk of your time becomes problematic for some people if there are other local commitments or political problems. You mentioned Emmanuel Macron. He has political issues that preoccupy his mind a bit. And the fact, to my mind, although again I'm not the decider in this, if the chargé d'affaires, who is a veteran diplomat, he's acting as the ambassador. If he is designated to receive the ceremonial
yeah,
okay, do it. Whether you do it in front of the mobs or whether you do it afterwards or whether you do it privately over lunch, or I'm not sure that matters so much. But in that case, the bigger person should take charge of that process. And the bigger person in this case would be South Africa's president, I think.
How has the G20 evolved compared to 10, 15 years ago?
Well, it's bigger. Big, it's more flamboyant. There's more stuff. The visuals of all those planes arriving, and they used to do it most of the time. The host country would pick some lovely resort area in which the whole circumstance could be controlled easily.
Yeah.
Right. Everybody got together, like in Banff or some resort in Germany or whatever it might be. And now it's become a bigger pin on the yearly calendar and a bigger event. And let me just offer my final thought on this.
Yeah.
I wrote something the other day arguing that we may, in fact, for meetings like this, we may have reached the high point, and it really is time now to turn this to something that uses much more virtual reality and much more online meeting, because the technology, if it's not mature yet, at least it's competent. And business people do this all the time. And I'm not convinced anymore that it's necessary to do it this way. I think you probably get more done if you meet the other way. And I may be a lonely voice on this now.
I suspect.
But I think that a lot of world leaders might say, that would save me a lot of trouble.
Yeah, but I guess a lot of this is what it looks like more than what actually is. So having them standing together in a picture.
Hey, we could do it holographically, and everybody's placed together with the screens, and it could look like it could look like something out of Star Trek.
Yes, Brooks, it's always a pleasure talking to you. Thanks so much indeed for sharing your thoughts with us in time. All right, that's where we're going to leave the English portion of our special broadcast coming out of Johannesburg and in South Africa, the Leaders Summit. We're hoping to be hearing from the President of South Africa sometime soon. There were rumblings that it could have been as soon as 10:30, but as you can see, we're there now. The leaders have arrived by and large, and they're all taking up their places. So one thinks that sooner rather than later, we're going to be hearing from President Ramaphosa. But in the meantime, coming up shortly, we're going to be saying bem-vindo as we get into the Portuguese section of our special broadcast.
Global leaders, African insights. Follow the G20 Summit with Channel Africa as it happens.
We are with Tamo Kapisa here from the Chinyanja desk. How are you this morning? So as the G20 kicks off this morning, world leaders have arrived, as we can see on the screens right in front of us at Nasrec. And as Peter articulated, that President Cyril Ramaphosa, being the host country and president, will be speaking very shortly. And all eyes are on Ramaphosa as to how he sells the African agenda to the rest of the world. The eyes and the hopes of many African countries are resting on South Africa having a seat at the table at the G20. And this puts pressure on South Africa as to how they deliver the mandate, the voices that are coming out from the various African countries and the groupings. In the past week, speaking to various people from Malawi, Zambia, Zimbabwe, via our programming, the voices have been in unison to say that they fully support the South African's presidency efforts to steer the negotiations toward meaningful action. And what they really want to see is funds being directed towards climate financing to fight climate change, looking at especially Southern Africa, which has been severely affected by droughts in the past several years. So that is what most people and organizations from across the SADC region are looking at. We spoke to various analysts and organizations who are hoping that the discussions between today and tomorrow, or what will be adopted, will center around the community needs, looking at the youth, women, empowerment and inclusive development. There are civil society organizations from Malawi, Zambia and Zimbabwe. In particular, from Malawi, we spoke to Belinda Somanje Chimombo, who is the Youth Impact Organization's Executive Director, and she highlighted the importance of participating at the G20 and Africa having a voice to be able to spread the message of hope to the rest of the world. And economically, we spoke to an economic analyst, Professor Betha Chikadza, who is the chief economist at the Malawi University of Science and Technology. And she emphasized that the absence of the United States at this summit is a missed opportunity, and Africa needs to take this and embrace it as looking at it to seek alternative markets to sell their products. And after this summit, the discussions don't end here. They need to continue and perhaps speak in unison so that they can forge forward with the agreements that are agreed upon come tomorrow, so that the African Continental Free Trade Agreement agreements can be forged forward, so that Africa can advance itself and stop relying on European countries or the United States going forward. So that has been some of the discussions and the sentiments coming across from the SADC region. We are now going to listen to some of the sentiments as articulated by economists and analysts in this package. Pamene msonkhano wa bungwe la G20 wayambika lero mdziko la South Africa, pali chiyembekezo chachikulu kuti mfundo zomwe atsogoleri ndi nthumwi akambirane zithandizira pakupititsa patsogolo masomphenya maka a m'maiko a mu Africa. Aka ndikoyamba msonkhanowu kuchitikira mu Africa, ndipo maso ali pa dziko la South Africa ndi bungwe loyanjanitsa maiko a mu Africa la African Union kuti alankhulira Africa yonse. Miyezi yapitayi nthambi pansi pa bungweli monga za umoyo, chuma, kusintha kwa nyengo, maphunziro zakhala zikukhazikitsa misonkhano pomwe nthumwi zakhala zikukambirana mfundo zomwe atsogoleri akuyenera kusayina pa tsiku lomaliza la msonkhanowu mawa. Mwa atsogoleri ena omwe akutenga nawo gawo pa msonkhanowu ndi mlembi wamkulu wa bungwe la United Nations Antonio Guterres, ndipo polankhula ndi wailesi ya South African Broadcasting Corporation, mlembiyu walimbikitsa atsogoleri a mubungweli kuti alimbikire pakulankhula chimodzi pakufuna kukweza zintchito zokweza miyoyo ya anthu pa dziko lonse.
Developing countries, in particular in Africa, are suffering from a perfect storm of
The G20 Summit through African eyes, live updates, and expert voices only on Channel Africa.
Being entrusted with the presidency of the G20. In the execution of its task as president of the G20, South Africa has, throughout the past year, through its stewardship of some 130 meetings in various parts of South Africa, in other countries on the African continent, and beyond our shores, including at the United Nations, we have sought to undertake this task with care, with dignity, and with diligence. We have sought at all times to preserve the integrity and the stature of the G20, a premier forum of international economic cooperation. From its initial focus on broad macroeconomic issues, the G20 is now engaged on matters such as trade, sustainable development, health, education, science and technology, agriculture, energy, the environment, climate change, and many others. It has therefore broadened its scope as the challenges of the peoples of the world requires that they should be addressed. Progress on each and all of these issues is a necessary condition for strong, sustainable, balanced, and inclusive growth. In pursuit of and in conformity with the founding mission of the G20, South Africa adopted the theme Solidarity, Equality, and Sustainability for its presidency in 2025. Through solidarity, we can create an inclusive future that advances the interests of people around the world. Adopted the theme Solidarity, Equality, and Sustainability for its presidency in 2025. Through solidarity, we can create an inclusive future that advances the interests of people around the world, at the greatest risk of being left behind. This is important in an interconnected world where the challenge faced by one nation affects all other nations. By promoting equality, we strive to ensure fair treatment and equal opportunities for the individuals and nations of the world. The disparities in wealth and development within and between nations is not only unjust and unsustainable, it is also one of the greatest impediments to sustainable development. It is essential that we break down divisions of economic status, of gender, of race, and geography. Sustainability involves meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. As a founding member of the G20, South Africa has sought to ensure that the development priorities of the Global South and the African continent find expression firmly and permanently on the agenda of the G20. This is important not only for the people of Africa and the Global South. It is vital for global stability and security, alleviating resource pressures, managing population movements, and reducing the risk of conflict. We seek stability because it attracts investment, it improves planning and reduces the risk of global economic shocks. And we prioritize inclusive and vibrant markets because they are able to drive innovation and efficiency. Thriving economies lift people out of poverty. They encourage greater investment and trade, and they generate the revenue needed to invest in public goods. The threats facing humanity today, from escalating geopolitical tensions, global warming, pandemics, energy and food insecurity, to inequality, unemployment, extreme poverty, and armed conflict jeopardize our collective future. It is therefore essential that we make greater and faster progress towards the achievement of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals by 2030. We welcome the Seville Commitment adopted in June this year, which sets forth a renewed global framework for financing for development. We must use this framework to catalyze development investments at scale in developing economy countries. We must continue the reform of the international financial architecture, ensuring that institutions are strengthened and are more inclusive and are equipped to meet the challenges both of the present and the future. At the beginning of our G20 presidency, we identified 4 high-level priorities. Firstly, we focus on action to strengthen disaster resilience and response. While climate-induced natural disasters affect countries around the world, they have a particularly devastating impact on countries that cannot afford the costs of recovery and rebuilding. We have agreed that it is essential for the global community, international finance institutions, development banks, and the private sector to scale up post-disaster construction. Secondly, we agreed that we must take action to ensure debt sustainability for low-income countries. The G20 needs to renew its efforts to advance debt sustainability while at the same time laying emphasis on those countries in the global south that are suffering from debt repayments. Thirdly, we said we should mobilize finance for a just energy transition, increasing the quality and quantity of climate finance flows in countries. Fourthly, we emphasized the importance of harnessing critical minerals for inclusive growth and sustainable development through the beneficiation of the minerals at the place of extraction. In addition to these 4 priorities, we have prioritized issues of inclusive economic growth, industrialization, inequality, unemployment, and security and artificial intelligence. Much of the work of the past year will be presented and considered at this meeting. We commend in particular the G20 at 20 review, which provides a detailed account of the path that this organization has traversed as the G20. It describes both our achievements and our challenges and makes proposals on how we can organize ourselves to be more focused on our core mandate. We welcome the work of the G20 Africa Expert Panel, which was led by South Africa's former Minister of Finance, Mr. Trevor Manuel. The panel argues that African efforts to accelerate productive investment require new global partnerships and strong multilateral cooperation. It calls on the G20 to support this effort by building a global policy framework that unlocks long-term finance and lower costs and investment at scale. We are also grateful for the work of the G20 Extraordinary Committee of Independent Experts on Global Inequality that was led by Professor Joseph Stiglitz, a Nobel. The recommendations of the Extraordinary Committee provide a solid platform on which to launch a renewed global effort to tackle inequality. As this is the first G20 Leaders Summit to be held in Africa, it carries the hopes and must reflect the aspirations of the people of this continent and of the world. We should not allow anything to diminish the value, the stature, and the impact of the first African G20 presidency. This G20 Leaders Summit has a responsibility not to allow the integrity and the credibility of the G20 to be weakened. In fact, from this summit, the G20 has been strengthened. We thank all delegations that have worked together with us in good faith to produce a G20 outcome document for this historic leaders meeting. The G20 underscores the value of the relevance of multilateralism. It recognizes that the challenges that we face can only be resolved through cooperation, collaboration, and partnership. The adoption of the declaration from the summit sends an important signal to the world that multilateralism can and does deliver. Across the world. It tells the world that as the leaders of the G20, to our solemn pledge to leave no person, no community, and no country behind. With those words, I therefore declare the G20 Leaders Summit open, and thank you. Your Excellencies, please allow me to take you through day one of the program. Session one will focus on inclusive and sustainable economic growth. This session will be followed by presentations of the recommendations of the reports of the Africa Expert Panel and the Extraordinary Committee of Independent Experts on Global Inequality. We will then have a working lunch, and this will be followed by a overwhelming consensus to adopt our declaration. Now, I should precede this by remembering what a Roman philosopher called Pliny, the elder, once said. He said to have said, ex Africa semper aliquid novi, meaning out of Africa there is always something new. So something new always does come out of Africa. So with that, we would like, therefore, okay. I'm told that the cameras are still on, they should be off. I don't know why that is so. With that, we would like, therefore, with a consensus that has emerged through the work that has been done over the whole year and the 130 meetings that have been held where each sector has been able to reach agreement, would like, therefore, to put the
I don't like this setup. Eh? Yeah.
The world is watching Johannesburg. Leaders from the planet's biggest economies gather to make decisions that shape nations, markets, and futures. You already know Channel Africa will be right there, bringing you the conversations, insights, and analysis that matter.
The best is yet to come.
The G20 Summit from the 22nd to the 23rd of November. As it happens, from an African perspective, stay tuned to Channel Africa and get all the G20 analysis. This weekend, South Africa will host the G20 Summit at the Nasrec Expo Center near Soweto. And Channel Africa will be right there to bring you live updates, interviews, and real-time insights from the main venue. And so, our regular lineup will be adjusted just a little bit for this weekend to accommodate the G20. On Saturday, the 22nd of November, the Oasis will broadcast for 2 hours. Out and About takes a break for a full look at the G20. After Africa Chart Toppers, our news and current affairs team will bring you special live broadcasts in 5 different languages directly from Nasrec. And normal programming will resume at 8 p.m. Central African Time. And then on Sunday, the 23rd of November, the Oasis will also broadcast for 2 hours. Tech Africa steps aside for our news and current affairs teams to bring you special live broadcasts in 5 different languages. Then, Planting the Seed resumes from 1 p.m. till 2 p.m. Central African Time. Channel Africa, your window to the continent, connecting you to the world in an African perspective.
Es-tu préoccupé par quelque chose? Es-tu passionné par les questions qui comptent? As-tu une voix qui mérite d'être entendue? Eh bien, nous avons la plateforme parfaite pour toi. Téléphone-nous ou fais-nous un WhatsApp au +27 66 408 87 42 et nous te rappellerons. Sois dans la conversation.
Salut Channel Africa, ici Beno le diamant rouge et Binal Sport depuis le Cameroun, le pays des lions. Voilà.
Sois dans la conversation. Il ne s'agit pas seulement de parler, mais c'est ta chance d'exprimer ton point de vue, de partager tes opinions et de t'engager avec une communauté qui valorise ton avis. Suivez-nous sur les réseaux sociaux, visitez notre site www.channelafrica.co.za et préparez-vous à partager vos points de vue sur Channel Africa, la perspective africaine.
Conversations are happening, and Channel Africa is at the heart of them. We tell the African story with clarity, pride, and purpose, reaching audiences that matter to your brand. Partner with us and connect your business with listeners across borders in multiple languages and markets. For partnership opportunities, sponsorship, or sales, email us at partnership@channelafrica.co.za. Channel Africa, the African perspective. Global leaders, African insights. Follow the G20 Summit with Channel Africa as it happens.
No, not the hour.
Right, welcome back. The G20. Speaking about throughout the course of the year, talking about the challenges that are brought on by inequality, and that for our planet and certainly the developing nations to move forward, the issues of inequality need to be dealt with. He spoke about being required in terms of the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030. He says that we need to hasten the pace to make sure these Sustainable Development Goals are met and reached. And he also spoke, again, another big theme, the reform of the international financial structures. And this, of course, developing nations often finding themselves at the brunt of the current infrastructures and falling into debt in the way that we know, and also paying premiums for things like loans. So he says that the international financial infrastructure needs to be looked upon and reformed. And Tsepiso, he spoke about things like just energy transition, which, again, another theme that's been really important, particularly for a country like South Africa and other countries where energy is coupled to climate change, and that we're not the biggest emitters, but the biggest sufferers. And yet, the fossil fuel debate, if you want us to switch, you have to help us. And many of these G20 nations not fulfilling their obligations.
Interesting, Peter, because the Energy and Minerals Minister Gwede Mantashe was saying yesterday that South Africa is still very much committed to coal. Now, in the hallways of Europe, in Washington, and all those other countries that are pushing for South Africa to energy, that is not something that's going to land very well. And yet the realities are we can't leave coal out of the energy mix, and we've got to have a good balancing act on that. And just on the issue of the economic implications and sovereignty of this conference, Peter, I think you asked it earlier on about if African countries can negotiate major debt relief, will it free up meaningful fiscal space for development? So that means, will the money go towards those areas where, budgeting is lacking? Health, that has been a major theme. I was thinking about seeing Dr. Tedros Ghebreyesus Adhanom, the Director General of the WHO. It's clear the countries are not spending enough. They're spending far below par when it comes to critical areas like health. President Ramaphosa also speaking about the need for unity, speaking about multilateralism. What does that look like at a conference like this? Because we spoke about the fact that there are very important leaders here, European leaders, those of, international agencies. How is that going to fit into the bigger picture of, because they also have relationships with the United States, and they have to themselves play a balancing act. So the wording is going to be very, very interesting of this declaration. We need to look out to see how it's worded, even if it's a declaration, how non-committal or committal it is, that language.
Another big story that he told, and we've been speaking about as a continent for a long time, is critical minerals.
Yes.
And he said that, listen, we have to move beyond just digging these products out of the ground and sending them out, but that the beneficiation needs to become a pillar upon which we go forward with our minerals, particularly given a lot of those critical minerals are consumed and depended upon by a lot of these G20 countries. So again, it'll be interesting to see how that journeys. I'm seeing the EU, not the EU, the African Continental Free Trade Area.
The Director
And I'm curious to see and hear, perhaps, when this conversation has happened, where we sit with that in terms of, right now our trade is all pretty much with these big G20 countries, but we should be trading much more within our continent. So what the contribution will be very curious.
So Peter will continue with that discussion. For now, let's go back to the studio for news. A little late, Shalani Tulo, apologies.
SABC News. The African Perspective.
Top stories this hour. South Africa's president officially opens the G20 summit and bitter disagreement at the COP30 climate summit in Brazil. Good morning. South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa has officially opened the G20 Leaders Summit at the Nasrec Expo Centre in Johannesburg. Leaders from the world's major economies are expected to tackle urgent global issues ranging from debt relief and trade reform to climate finance and digital innovation. Meanwhile, spokesperson to Minister of International Relations and Cooperation Crispin Piri says they've marked the US delegation absent from the ongoing G20 summit. Speaking on the sidelines of the summit, he says they have also rejected the US's proposal for President Ramaphosa to hand over the G20 presidency to its acting ambassador. We now cross live to our reporter Nhlanhla Mahlangu, who is at the Nasrec Expo Centre. Nhlanhla, what is the latest on the ground?
Good morning, Jalani, and good morning to the listeners. The President Cyril Ramaphosa has officially opened the G20 summit currently underway at the Nasrec Expo Centre in Johannesburg. It says South Africa's participation in the summit is guided by 4 strategic foreign policy pillars which have a national interest: the African agenda, South-to-South cooperation, and multilateralism. The theme of the G20 South African presidency is solidarity, equality, and sustainability. President Ramaphosa says South Africa has used its presidency of the G20 to push for action to address the challenges of poor nations, such as the cooling financing to help countries facing the devastating effects of climate change, something analysts and experts estimate will require about $1 trillion a year by 2030. Reporting for Channel Africa, I am Nhlanhla Mahlangu at the Nasrec Expo Centre in Johannesburg.
And a French delegate attending the G20 Leaders Summit at the Nasrec Expo Centre believes the proposed agenda will drastically change due to US President Donald Trump's decision not to attend. Hundreds of delegates, including heads of state and government representatives, are attending the summit, which is taking place on African soil for the first time. French delegate Teglate Texia says the US proposed peace plans for the Ukraine-Russia war are also likely to shift the summit's agenda.
I guess this G20 is disturbed by the fact that Donald Trump refused to come there, and all the agenda, especially for the Europeans, are totally also disturbed, in fact, with what's going on in Ukraine, with the peace plan that was proposed last night by the United States. And I guess, in fact, this all the agenda is now is moving totally.
Meanwhile, 2 major protests are expected to take place near the Expo Centre. The organisers are the Umkhonto weSizwe Party and the social movement, which has turned into a political party, Operation Dudula. The parties are against South Africa hosting the summit in the midst of poverty, inequality and corruption. Police say the protests are allowed in designated areas, but they have warned that lawlessness will not be tolerated. Crisalda Lewis reports.
Operation Dudula says the event will not change the material conditions of South Africans who face the challenge of access to basic services due to the influx of illegal immigrants and corruption. Operation Dudula says it's in that context that when the G20 concludes, the agenda of putting South Africans first must remain the nation's top priority. It also says international recognition means nothing if South Africans continue to struggle, and South Africa's global leadership must start with national responsibility.
The Republican Congresswoman and former close ally of President Donald Trump, Marjorie Taylor Greene, has announced that she's giving up her seat in the House of Representatives. Her decision follows a bitter fallout with Trump, who called her a traitor. This after she criticized his earlier refusal to authorize the release of documents about the late convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. Greene has been one of the stars of the MAGA movement. She announced her decision in a video she posted on social media.
I'll be resigning from office with my last day being January 5th, 2026, and I look forward to seeing many of you again sometime in the future. May God bless you all And may God bless America.
And finally, bitter disagreement at the COP30 climate summit in Brazil over whether to mention fossil fuels in the final agreement has pushed the gathering to run over time. Delegates inside a guarded negotiating room say talks have become very difficult. The BBC's Matt McGrath has more.
There was a lot of disappointment from a number of countries, the European Union, and from countries like Colombia and others, and developing countries and island states as well, who feel that this question of the fossil fuels element in there is important if this whole COP idea is to progress and go anywhere. And another key question, of course, in balancing the question of cutting fossil fuels is the question of money for countries to adapt to the growing impacts of climate change. I think those two issues, there was hope that a deal could be done around them, but right now everything seems quite stuck.
And recapping the top story this hour, South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa has officially opened the G20 Leaders Summit at the Nasrec Expo Centre in Johannesburg. For any news stories you would like to share with us, please do send an email to newsroom@channelafrica.co.za or call us on +27 11 714 4459. For Channel Africa News, I'm Jolani Tulo Webe.
SABC News. The African Perspective. This weekend, South Africa will host the G20 Summit at the Nasrec Expo Center near Soweto. And Channel Africa will be right there to bring you live updates, interviews, and real-time insights from the main venue. And so, our regular lineup will be adjusted just a little bit for this weekend to accommodate the G20. On Saturday, the 22nd of November, the Oasis will broadcast for 2 hours. Out and About takes a break for a full look at the G20. After Africa Chart Toppers, our news and current affairs team will bring you special live broadcasts in 5 different languages directly from Nasrec. And normal programming will resume at 8 p.m. Central African Time. And then on Sunday, the 23rd of November, the Oasis will also broadcast for 2 hours. Tech Africa steps aside for our news and current affairs teams to bring you special live broadcasts in 5 different languages. Then, Planting the Seed resumes from 1 p.m. till 2 p.m. Central African Time. Channel Africa, your window to the continent, connecting you to the world in an African perspective. The G20 Summit, through African eyes, live updates, and expert voices, only on Channel Africa.
And you are indeed listening to Channel Africa, the African Perspective, live from the G20 Leaders Summit in Nasrec, Johannesburg. From the G20 Leaders Summit in Nasrec, Johannesburg, as we have just seen President Cyril Ramaphosa open that first day of the Leaders Summit, speaking about a declaration, very intent that that's what's going to come out of it. He raised several issues, the issue of critical minerals. He spoke about the financial architecture. One of the things he also spoke about was the need for unity and improvement in the form of reform, so to speak, when it comes to multilateralism. And we have Dr. Frank Legaba from the School of Governance at Witwatersrand University back with us again. Thanks, Dr. Legaba. I want to then go back to, because one of the things that when unity is needed and reform certainly is needed is on, debt review, the debt trap that most African countries face. And I'm just looking at UN data. It shows that by the end of 2023, Africa's external debt was around $1.15 trillion US dollars.
That's a lot.
That's a huge amount.
That's a lot of money. It can fund an energy project in the DR Congo. Fund an energy project that can distribute energy in the entire continent, and that will be a renewable energy. It's a lot of money. It's a lot of money. Combine that with the illicit financial flows.
Absolutely.
According to the report that is in this report by Trevor Manuel, former minister, finance minister, they say about 88.6 billion US dollars goes unaccounted for in the continent. It's illicit financial flows. That is an illicit financial flow in the informal way. Now calculate the formal one that happens in a formal way that has been normalized. Companies that are doing business in the continent, registered in the stock exchanges, in their own metropoles. It's another way of illicit outflows in the continent, although that may be a very controversial to put at it. But all of it, whether it's done illicitly or it's done illegally, it's accumulation from here. And we're talking about extraction. And that's why President Ramaphosa yesterday was very emphatic to the AU. Guys, we need to talk about processing and beneficiation. As we talk of critical minerals, of course we're talking about critical minerals in the continent and all of that, but we need to start emphasizing issues of processing and beneficiation. And G20 countries, please, when you do engage with African countries, you sign up trade agreements. Help to build this capacity in the continent. So, but the issue of debt is out of control. It's getting out of control. But also, look, the issue of debt is not new. Debt starts from the 1980s with the structural adjustment programs, when the IMF and the World Bank came up with a program to structurally adjust systems of African states to be open to. It was liberalization of African markets. The role of the state must move away from the economy and all of that. By 1990, debt was very high. Agriculture was unsustainable in the continent. We were just producers of raw materials. The exchange rate, export exchange rate, was so unfair to the continent and all of that. So I'm saying since from 1980s, we've been talking about this issue. NEPAD comes through, we say, okay, let's address the issue of debt. We talk about it, it still continues. Now it's in the agenda again. Let's talk about debt, but the issue is we are talking about debt in terms of frameworks and all of that. We're not talking about the real issues, and I think that's why President Ramaphosa says, let's talk about beneficiation, because that's where the real issues are. You can talk about debt and where the state whether it finances education, infrastructure, and all, but I think it's important to talk about the issue of how states gather revenue out of this, which is through beneficiation and processing. The other thing, Osepiso, is that as you talk of debt and strategies of getting out of debt, I think we also need to talk about the role of private sector. How private sector plays a role in the continent. For the longest time, African states were told to build infrastructure in energy infrastructure, road infrastructure, railway infrastructure. Get money for that. To do what? For ease of business to, right? For business to come and do business and all of that. But how much, when you compare the value of infrastructure development, infrastructure that is being used by private sector, how much does it amount in terms of the amount of money we have borrowed and in terms of the repayments and the revenue of the country? That's one of the things that I think also we need to talk about.
So in light of that, so there are some civil society organizations and some observers who are saying the problem is the current G20 common framework, saying that it is, really designed to focus on low income, highly indebted countries, and that there is a need for restructuring, but not under traditional multilateral or bilateral mechanisms, because they're difficult. Can you just share your thoughts on that? And what is problematic in your view about this current framework of the G20?
The current framework is the lending rate, among other things, and the lending itself. And the problem with the lending is, I don't know if I said this earlier on, Ethiopia grows at an average of 5%, according to the ADB and World Bank. But Ethiopia is one of the highly indebted countries that is getting to a point of what you call sovereign debt as a crisis, where it is incapable of, now we can no longer get debt anymore because we are highly indebted. Ethiopia is getting there, but the rate of growth is high. Why has Ethiopia gotten to this point? It's because of the rate of lending, one. Two, the social spending. You loan the money, you spend it on important issues like education, healthcare. But what is the GDP of the country? Okay, you are registering high rates of GDP growth, 5%. That's an enormous growth rate. Where is the money going? out of this growth rate. It's going to the metropoles. The issue I was talking about, that you have got companies doing business here in the continent, they are registered elsewhere. Theirs is just to accumulate resource extraction and all of that. So it has to change. So the rate of borrowing, but it also should be coupled with the responsibility of the private sector, which is something we are not talking about, that I'm not getting out. I tried to read the report. I read that the report of the panel. The role of private sector is not so much pointed to say what is the role of private sector in easing the burden of loans.
I actually just wanted, there was a figure that I saw now, and that has to do with how much or how the bulk of the debt is actually owed to private entities, and I'll get to that in just a moment. I'm just baffled because I was actually looking at it now. But basically, the finding is that the current framework has under-delivered just in terms of the. Okay, so yes, no, I see that it's under-delivered by 13.6 billion US dollars, and that's high risk debt that it reduced it by. So in layman's terms, what are we talking about? And we'll get to the issue of private entities and how much is owed to them, because it seems like a great deal of it is owed to them. But let's talk about why the framework has under-delivered.
Yeah, it's basically the how much countries get out of business and all of that, and that's why they talk of, as a remedy, taxation, that you need to increase taxation and all of that. But dominantly the narrative is, if you tax companies high, you are chasing them away. Is the assumption, right? So if the panel propose that we must tax companies high, will that be a good solution to the issue? I don't think so. I think the triple Ps are important way of doing it. Put the responsibility on private sector to invest in the infrastructure you are going to do. Especially now we're talking of processing and industrialization. Who is going to pay for the build-up of industries? The actual building, construction of industries, the roads, the railways, and all of that. Who is going to pay for that? It's obviously expected on the state. But who is going to utilize all of that? Is the companies and all of that. And that's why then the panel says tax. But taxation, I don't believe in it. It's an easy intervention, which for me does not alleviate the problem in the long run. The way to solve this problem, I think, put the responsibility of infrastructure development on the private sector themselves. Let them construct the road. Let them do the industries. Let them build the industries, because they are the ones. So that way they will be much more invested. They will not only invest it in terms of resource extraction, but they will be invested because they've built all of this infrastructure. So they will take ownership of it. They will even take ownership in as far as security of the infrastructure is concerned. Look at the railway and the estimates of how much we need to secure the railway and all of that. And one of the things I find very disturbing is that we are talking of public sector reforms. One of the things is the railway revitalization. So the state is going to revitalize the railways, but private locomotives are the ones that are going to run on this railway. How fair is that? Okay, taxation, okay, I understand. But for me, it's not a fair solution to what private sector gets out of this.
I mean, as you speak about that, I'm thinking of mining companies. They are very wanting in keeping to their developmental commitments in communities. And government has not been able to hold them accountable. So is it because we lack the right policies, or are we just not showing enough commitment to our goals? Because
I like how you put it, Sepiso, because it puts responsibility on the political leadership. 2 weeks back, at the School of Governance, we held a dialogue funded by Sibanye Sibanye Stillwater and the communities that Sibanye is doing business in. It was a huge dialogue. But I was listening at the back of the auditorium, listening to the conversation. There are polarized voices in the room. And the blame on the state, the blame on DMR, the blame on some of the community leaders, the blame of councillors, and all of. So, this is where the leadership plays a role, harmonizing all these voices, making sure that the community speak in one voice. So, in the room, you had traditional authorities. They say, the mines don't take us seriously when they come into our space. Community says, no, we don't want the kings. The king is captured in our own South African language. The chief is captured. Even the councillor is captured. So that's where the role of the state is. And what I saw is the absence of the role of the state. Osepi, not far from here, just at Bapung, Brits, I hear stories of excavations that are taking place in people's yards.
Yes.
It's a widespread phenomenon apparently. I didn't know. I heard this I was shocked. I was like, where is the state? So so this is among the things about the issue of the hegemony of the state. Hegemony of the state was to the communities, deep into the community. So we need to get the state very right in terms of how it manages business. So the conventional, the contemporary economists, especially liberal economists who say the state must move out of the market, must give responsibilities to the market and all of that, are also eroding that state authority and in a way opening up space, polarizing the space. And so the state needs to play that role. It needs to play a role at negotiating for communities and also reining in on business where they do business.
So just as you're speaking about this case of, and there was a story I think the SABC did where someone or some Samazamas were arrested. I can't remember if it was as a result of whistleblowing but it was this man who was being paid for his house to be used because they went underground. They would build a tunnel, went underground, and they would extract, the gold from a nearby mine. It was such an insane story, but I think it's about regulation and lack of surveillance as well. So the role of community, and I'm talking advocacy here, what are communities doing? The C20, how are they? Because if the mining companies are not meeting their obligations to communities become desperate. So how could we further improve that collaboration?
In answering your question, Kolobeni, is it Kolobeni or Kolobeni, the community that was fighting the mines and DMR, and they won their issue through the courts. It's a very classical case in South Africa. It's a serious lesson as to, in a case where DMR seems to be agreeing with the mining companies and it's not so much beneficial to the community, the mobilization through the civil society organization is very instrumental. But, yesterday we were talking about the issue of anti-corruption, and we're picking on the issue of Brazil's discussion, where in Brazil the emphasis was placed on credibility of law enforcement agencies. So that conversation, we shouldn't leave it to Brazil. We should bring it back here as we are progressing with G20. How are law enforcement agencies credible in helping communities to hold mining companies accountable? How are law enforcement agencies helping even with the issue of the Zamazamas? The sad stories that of Stilfontein, where the mastermind apparently escaped.
Yes.
From how can it be? How can it be that the kingpin will escape the police just like that? So the credibility of law enforcement, that's one facet to it. The other facet to it is the role of civil society, organized in the communities. But the problem is, and from the discussions we had from the dialogue I was sharing here, is that the communities were saying, Even civil society organizations, we don't trust them. We suspect they are in the pockets of the big business and all of that. So the issue of trust in terms of civil society organization, trust in terms of the state and state institutions, that includes law enforcement agencies, human rights commission, and all of that. So it's a multiplicity of things here, and this is where the C20 is very important. I was so disappointed that it was divided at first. The civil society, they couldn't even go ahead with getting a declaration and all of that. But I think, civil society is also one aspect that is highly polarized. The interests are clashing and all of that. But the point is, we have a case here that we have learned from Ekolobeni that can serve as a base case study on how to hold the state and the mining company accountable.
So just in terms of going back to what President Ramaphosa spoke about, the need for solidarity, and I'd imagine mostly here we're talking about the global south.
Yes.
Because it bears the disproportionate burdens of a lot of the challenges that we face, whether it's hunger, inequality, and we're talking now about the need for structural changes, whether it's the financial architecture, whether it's multilateralism. But it seems that it is hamstrung because the big powers that they find themselves beholden to, that's where the picture's not budging. And I'm just thinking of what happens at the United Nations, for instance, at the Security Council, on issues to do with the Middle East conflict. We've seen certain African countries take a stance. And it's really basically about saving one's own skin. But this is the moment. We've been talking about the G20 as the African moment. And what is your optimism levels about how we're going to come out of this? Are we, and I'm just talking about the support that that South Africa will get from other African countries. I'm talking past the declaration now. There's a declaration, and then we're in the crosshairs with the United States and those of its allies.
Look, Osepi, the solidarity, I think if you listen to the president earlier on, he put solidarity above almost everything. Solidarity and coming to this G20, I think I think that's why then you see the president of the EU sitting right next to the President Ramaphosa. Among other things, why is the EU so important is because the EU, I think, is the first, if my memory serves me well, after the whole announcement of the tariffs, is the first to come up to South Africa and say, we are available, we are the alternative market, we are willing to grow in fact, they were asserting their position as the largest investor, to say, we remember we are here, we are the biggest market. And now when we are talking, when the talks of the declaration were now dominant talks, you also see the EU also say, no, we're going to of course not be so much hostile to the declaration. One of the things also here is the role of France. These middle powers. The role of France, the foreign policy of France in the continent may be unpalatable to us who are progressive, who consider ourselves as Pan-Africanists. But coming to this G20, the voice of France was one of those voices that was very important. Emmanuel Macron focused on the G20, keeping focus on it, going to a Freedom Park, talking about the role of those three French who were involved in the liberation struggle, kind of saying, France, we've got your back, South Africa, as France. And looking at also the role that France has assumed in terms of the conflict in the Middle East, Palestine and Israel, where Emmanuel Macron, when the 20-point agreement was announced by the White House, he convened alternative voices to say we must have an alternative, we must look at this case. In fact, the UN must play much more role here. The peace mission that must be sent there, it must be our initiative. So that the role of many players here and in supporting South Africa is a very interesting thing of solidarity.
Dr. Lekabo, I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there with you, but we do appreciate your time coming to speak with us, sharing with us your insights around the G20 and some of the major issues that are under discussion. This is Channel Africa, the African perspective. Africa is one big family, different languages, and we are going to bring in our colleagues now from the Portuguese desk, and we hand over to my colleague Jacob Tevane to hear how he and the team at the Portuguese desk have been absorbing and really interpreting events at the G20. Jacob?
Olá, saudações,
bom dia,
Pizzo,
saudações,
bom dia. Pode ser ou pode ser. Pois bem, I must say that the Portuguese countries are well represented at the G20 summit by our main man, the Brazilian president Lula Inácio da Silva, and Angolan and African Union head of state João Lourenço. So the Portuguese countries are celebrating together, not only with South Africa, but the African continent as a whole. So I must say that we have been following the program, and right now I'll take you through the Portuguese service.
A atenção do mundo está em Joanesburgo. Líderes das maiores economias do planeta reúnem-se para tomar decisões que irão moldar o futuro das nações e dos mercados. O Channel África está no centro dos acontecimentos a trazer-lhe as conversas, análises e perspectivas que realmente importam. A cimeira do G20 nos dias 22 e 23 de novembro sob uma perspectiva africana em tempo real. Acompanhe tudo no Channel África.
Daqui fala o Jacob Tevane, em direto dos estúdios centrais em Auckland Park, cidade de Joanesburgo, África do Sul, acompanhando a cimeira do G20. Hoje trazemos os principais detalhes sobre o arranque dos trabalhos, as declarações sociais dos líderes e o papel dos países lusófonos neste encontro.
With those words, I therefore declare the G20 Leaders Summit open. And thank you.
E foi precisamente com essas palavras que o chefe do Estado sul-africano, Cyril Matamela Ramaphosa, abriu a cimeira do G20, que arrancou na manhã deste sábado com delegações de todo o mundo reunidas para discutir o crescimento econômico, crise climática, segurança alimentar e reforma das instituições globais. Mais pormenores em torno do discurso de Ramaphosa aqui no Canal África, a perspectiva africana.
From its initial focus on broad macroeconomic issues, the G20 is now engaged on matters such as trade.
Do seu foco inicial em amplas questões macroeconômicas, o G20 está agora envolvido em assuntos como o comércio, desenvolvimento sustentável, saúde, educação, ciência e tecnologia, agricultura, energia, ambiente, alterações climáticas e muitos outros. Portanto, alargou o seu âmbito.
Climate change and many others. It has therefore broadened its scope.
O alívio da dívida dos países de baixo rendimento e o combate à desigualdade econômica estão em foco na Cimeira do G20, boicotada pelos Estados Unidos, que arrancou na manhã deste sábado aqui na Terra do Rande. Entre as prioridades estabelecidas pela África do Sul, que organiza pela primeira vez uma cimeira do grupo do continente africano para a presidência do G20, estão também o reforço da resiliência a catástrofes, o financiamento de uma transição energética justa e a exploração de minerais críticos para o crescimento inclusivo e o desenvolvimento sustentável.
The disparities in wealth and development within and between nations is not only unjust and unsustainable.
As disparidades de riqueza e desenvolvimento dentro e entre outras nações não são apenas injustas, insustentáveis, mas também um dos maiores obstáculos ao desenvolvimento sustentável. É essencial que eliminemos as divisões de estatuto econômico, de gênero, de raça e de geografia.
Down divisions of economic status, of gender, of race and geography.
E dando continuidade à página das atualidades da Cimeira do G20 aqui no Canal África, e sabemos que estão nos acompanhando através do canal da DCV 802 ou então www.channelafrica.co.za. O secretário-geral das Nações Unidas, António Guterres, elogiou igualmente a liderança do presidente sul-africano Ramaphosa. Afirmou que Ramaphosa colocou em discussão todas as questões importantes relacionadas com as necessidades tanto financeiras como econômicas dos países em desenvolvimento em geral e dos países africanos em particular. Guterres deu uma conferência de imprensa em Johannesburg antes da Cimeira do G20.
The G20 is an informal gathering that decides by consensus. And obviously,
o G20 é um grupo informal que decide por consenso. E, obviamente, é uma das razões pelas quais vos falo hoje e para pressionar o G20 a realizar exatamente as reformas necessárias para que as perspectivas de desenvolvimento e a implementação das regras de desenvolvimento sustentável no continente africano se tornem realidade. O sistema, tal como funciona hoje, é injusto e ineficaz. E tenho dito repetidamente que a atual arquitetura financeira internacional foi concebida por um conjunto de países desenvolvidos e essencialmente adaptada às necessidades das suas economias. É tempo de termos um sistema financeiro internacional verdadeiramente global, cuja principal preocupação seja enfrentar os desafios que os países em desenvolvimento enfrentam.
address the challenges that developing countries face.
E dando continuidade à Cimeira do G20, a África do Sul, como país anfitriã, enfrenta desafios enquanto procura reforçar o seu papel global, tratando de temas cruciais como a justiça econômica e a transição energética. Para nos ajudar a compreender as implicações desta cimeira e o impacto da ausência de um dos atores globais, temos conosco Humberto Pérez, analista político brasileiro.
O Donald Trump, o atual presidente americano, ele repete o que fez no mandato anterior, que foi afastar os Estados Unidos de toda e qualquer discussão política relevante para o planeta. Ele não veio e não mandou ninguém aqui na COP30 que aconteceu no Brasil e ignorou, e a COP foi um sucesso. Então ele afastou os Estados Unidos de tudo e quer voltar a ter aquela hegemonia americana de antes, mas a gente não sabe quais são as bases para isso, com base em quê? Porque ele não só se afasta, como ele cria problema diplomático com todo mundo. Ele está com problema diplomático aqui com a Venezuela e agora com a Colômbia também. Quer dizer, aí na África arranjou um problema com a Nigéria no dia da abertura da COP. Quer dizer, ele vive tensionando as relações americanas com o mundo, com o planeta inteiro. E provavelmente vai tensionar de novo com a África do Sul, porque já teve um problema. Já teve uma entrevista que ele foi deselegante com o presidente sul-africano. Depois ele voltou a acusar a África do Sul de perseguir brancos. Quer dizer, ele vive tensionando as relações e isso é ruim para o mundo inteiro. Então, para o G20 vai ser um retrocesso brutal se os americanos não participarem de todos os debates.
Sim, o presidente Ramaphosa manifestou que a África do Sul consideraria positiva uma mudança na postura dos Estados Unidos, mas, ao mesmo tempo, houve uma troca de acusações entre os dois lados. De que forma este impasse pode afetar a imagem da África do Sul enquanto anfitriã e mediadora na cimeira?
Olha, infelizmente vai comprometer sim, vai criar uma situação desagradável para a África do Sul. Porque quando você faz uma reunião desse tamanho com as 20 maiores economias do planeta, o que você espera é que se faça um debate de alto nível e que para buscar solução para o problema. O debate do G20 hoje está focado nas questões econômicas, para diminuir a pobreza, para diminuir a diferença enorme que existe entre países ricos e pobres, países em desenvolvimento, e sem a presença americana, que é a maior economia do mundo ainda é a maior economia do mundo, eu acredito que vai ser superada em breve, mas é a maior potência militar do mundo. Essa aí vai demorar um pouco mais para ser superada. É muito ruim porque gera um desgaste. O Trump, ele usa do espaço que ele tem na mídia, do espaço que a imprensa dá para ele, para atacar e para desagradar e para causar constrangimento. Então, para a África do Sul, vai ser muito ruim. Eu sei que o presidente sul-africano está tentando demover dessa postura e chamar os Estados Unidos para fazer problema, porque os americanos é que vão presidir o G20 após a África do Sul. Então, aí ficou mais agradável ainda. É um desgaste assim, absurdo, no momento em que o mundo está muito cheio de tensão.
Com a ausência dos Estados Unidos, alguns analistas apontam que a União Europeia e a China poderão aproveitar a oportunidade para reforçar a sua relação com a África do Sul. Como vê a possibilidade de África do Sul tirar partido desta situação e que impacto poderá ter nas suas relações diplomáticas com essas potências?
Já foi dito e repetido várias vezes que espaço político não fica vazio. Se os americanos se afastam de qualquer relação direta, de qualquer relação diplomática com o país, esfria essas relações, obviamente que haverão outros atores políticos no mundo que vão ocupar esse espaço. É o que aconteceu, por exemplo, com aquele imbróglio das tarifas. Começou a tarifar todo mundo, tarifas altíssimas, a China começou a reduzir as tarifas dela, ou seja, ela ganhou muita gente preferiu fazer negócio com a China. Então, eu acho que a China saiu ganhando. Os americanos não saíram ganhando nada, eles só perderam. Tanto que agora acabaram de revogar as tarifas em relação ao Brasil, porque os nossos produtos são produtos que eles precisam e estavam ficando muito caros lá. Um dos motivos que levou à redução foi esse. Então, esse espaço político, a União Europeia também teve vários atritos com o Donald Trump no ano passado e agora está percebendo que não dá para ficar nessa disputa e nessa briga e tentando reconquistar os americanos. Se ele não quer, não quer. Então, eu creio que os grandes beneficiados agora, tanto para a África do Sul quanto para os demais países da África, é a União Europeia e a China que vão estreitar relações, vão ampliar as relações diplomáticas e as relações econômicas, né? E o que a gente espera é isso mesmo, é que venha dinheiro para investir nas necessidades maiores que a população está passando.
A cimeira foca-se em questões cruciais como a justiça econômica e o alívio da dívida dos países em desenvolvimento. Quais são os principais desafios que a África do Sul e outros países poderão enfrentar para chegar a um consenso efetivo nestes temas e qual pode ser o papel da África do Sul como mediadora entre os diferentes blocos?
A África do Sul ela tem um papel importante porque ela é um dos primeiros países a formar os BRICS. E os BRICS estão construindo uma alternativa aos modelos que eram dominados pelos países do G7. O G7 sempre dominou o FMI, sempre dominou o Banco Mundial e sempre impôs as regras. E os BRICS vêm buscando construir uma alternativa a esses modelos. E a África do Sul sempre teve esse papel importante e sempre adotou posições políticas muito boas nesse sentido. Então, eu creio que para a África do Sul, o espaço vai ser o espaço para aumentar o debate sobre essa alternativa, o debate sobre o multilateralismo.
E a fica para trás, Humberto Pérez, analista político brasileiro, falando-vos a partir da cidade de Belo Horizonte, Brasil. Estimados ouvintes, voltamos quando forem precisamente 18 horas de Johannesburg, aqui na terra do Rand, com o resumo completo do dia e convidados especiais e reportagens exclusivas com João Yabalá e Jacob Tivani. Aquele abraço e até logo.
This weekend, South Africa will host the G20 Summit at the Nasrec Expo Center near Soweto. And Channel Africa will be right there to bring you live updates, interviews, and real-time insights from the main venue. And so, our regular lineup will be adjusted just a little bit for this weekend to accommodate the G20. On Saturday, the 22nd of November, the Oasis will broadcast for 2 hours. Out and About takes a break for a full look at the G20. After Africa Chart Toppers, our news and current affairs team will bring you special live broadcasts in 5 different languages directly from Nasrec. And normal programming will resume at 8 p.m. p.m. Central African Time. And then on Sunday, the 23rd of November, the Oasis will also broadcast for 2 hours. Tech Africa steps aside for our news and current affairs teams to bring you special live broadcast in 5 different languages. Then, Planting the Seed resumes from 1 p.m. till 2 p.m. Central African Time. Channel Africa, your window to the continent, connecting you to the world in an African perspective. Global leaders, African insights. Follow the G20 summit with Channel Africa as it happens.
And you are listening to a live broadcast of the G20 Leaders Summit out here in Nasrec as the G20 leaders convene to talk about the nuts and bolts of what will be in that declaration, if there's going to be a declaration, and we'll see if there is true consensus. President Cyril Ramaphosa, in his opening address, calling for unity and solidarity. We see President Macron now addressing the summit, and we will be looking at insights into what might possibly be stickler points, if there are some. Peter, we're joined by Dr. Lebohang Pheko, who's also going to share her insights on what's been happening.
So good to talk to you. Good to see you.
You too.
G20.
Yeah.
What does it mean for Africa right now? Is it game-changing? Not by any stretch of the imagination.
No, but I mean, I think the one thing that's really useful and interesting about it is that, as we know, it's the 4th consecutive G20 that's taking place in the majority world, and we are feeding off the momentum of India, Indonesia, and Brazil. And what the Brazilian agenda particularly did was to shift the needle even further away from the 2 mainstays previously of the G20, which were basically, debt and crisis management. Those were basically it. Now we talk about development. Now we talk about climate change. Now we talk about intellectual property. Now we talk about labor rights. Now we talk about a whole host of social inequality, poverty. This was not language that really was there when earlier on in the G20's incarnation. So that's useful. But whether we can call it game-changing, bit generous.
Yeah. So I had a conversation with Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala just a couple of days ago. And she said something interesting to me, almost to suggest, let's not push too hard right now. Rather go through this and then see where we can go. And I'm wondering if her experience at the WTO, understanding how these powers work, that maybe there are steps that we need to take for the African agenda. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that these institutions, the Bretton Woods institutions, are inherently not built and designed with us in mind, like most multilateral institutions. The power and the voice and the origins of them are very much centered within a Euro-US framing. So remember that even the IMF, the World Bank, these were built and developed to recover from their own world wars, right? And then even similarly, the G7 in the 1970s was also created to rescue from the oil crisis at the time, which also then led to the linking of the US dollar to oil prices, and that's a legacy of the dollarization and the financialization of global economics that all of us are living in the afterlife of. So none of these institutions, Peter and Tepi, have really ever had the inclination to be inclusive, to be truly diverse, and to be truly representative of African country interests. I've always been of the view that in as much as it's polite democracy or polite diplomacy to attend, to participate, we really shouldn't think that these are where we're going to be able to resolve, to build, to reconstruct our own economic, political, democratic architecture.
And just following on that train of thought, Dr. Pheko, so if they're not designed to, and we're talking about economic reform in dealing with injustices, particularly in the African continent. So what is the likelihood, also given the informal nature of the G20 and the real power asymmetries, how much of this is going to be rhetoric at the end of
I don't have much faith. I mean, I think people who sort of may have heard me speak before and follow some of my writing, I've really never had faith in these sorts of institutions. I've been a skeptic and a critic of the WTO, of the IMF, of the World Bank, even though I follow the conversations very carefully, and similarly a skeptic of the G20. What sets the G20 apart to a lesser extent is that it is, even though it's non-binding, it also doesn't have the veto mechanisms, which means that minority country, which the IMF and the World Bank do, where minority countries, i.e., population minorities of Europe and the US, are able to veto, and really go against the aspirations of a global majority. The G20 at least offers much greater fluidity, flexibility, and of course, consensus building. But then, of course, it's non-binding, and of course, it also lives in the afterlife of the G7, where we are also at this table by the invitation of the original 7 countries. So, look, it has its merits as a discussion as a place in the forum of discussion and of stating our own aspirations, but it is not the place to build African futures and African imaginations. No.
I suppose it's a double-edged sword, though, the informality, because in the end, people can renege on their promises. And so how does Africa deal with that then?
I think that we really ought to be focusing our energy. As I say, this is polite diplomacy, it's fine, but we need to be focusing on our own institutions. I've always been of that view. We have a moribund African Union, which is now slightly muddied the waters by then joining as an observer per se of the G20, so kind of G21, I suppose. We also have a very moribund, SADC, our regional economic formations are not really functioning to full capacity, and yet on paper, like so many things about us, they have excellent, progressive, and in some ways very avant-garde trade policy, industrial architecture.
So I just want to jump in there. I'm sorry, Tsepiso. What would a G54 for Africa look like if we did it properly?
A G4, as in for the continent?
Yes.
I mean, isn't that what the African Union really ought to be? Do we need to, burn down that the Chinese-sponsored building, and then recreate something else? Yeah. Are there ways in which we can really draw on the good lessons? I mean, the Sherpa track within the G20 is really interesting, because that's where the technocrats do all the work. And it has got some influence. The finance track, what needs to happen is that we also need to make sure that the other tracks, and the other engagement groups, your Think 20, your Think Tank 20, which I've been a part of, your Youth 20, your Science 20, which is becoming incredibly influential. Perhaps we could use some of those modalities to reframe and reimagine what a much more productive and a much more forward-thinking institution of an African Union could look like, because it's so displaced and so far away from, dispersed from most African people. It's a place somewhere, and if you ask the average person, they might not even know where exactly it is situated, and that's a damning indictment. We also are a host of the Pan-African Parliament. Do we need more institutions? As for the Pan-African Parliament, it's so very much, it's extremely incoherent. It doesn't even cohere with the African Union. It's in fact in competition with, and often at odds with, hardly any overlaps in terms of pronouncements, strategic direction. So I'm not sure whether building new institutions, building more Gs or anything is the way to go. Perhaps we need to think of a project of reclamation of existing institutions, and at least at the very least, an audit of why they're not effective. And also, what is it that African people want? How do we want to be represented? What are the sorts of issues that we are most interested in? And what are the kind of institutions that will match those aspirations.
So would you bring it down to institutional misalignment, do you think?
A bit more than that. I think it's the politics of them, because also the challenge with a lot of these with a lot of the current formations, including the BRICS, is that they've basically taken the IMF, the Bretton Woods, the very market-driven, market-orthodox, some would say neoliberal template, and just pasted it, on these processes. So you're not getting anything new. At the beginning of when South Africa was joining the BRICS, I was part of a few of these sorts of think tanky, discussions. And I said at the time, and I've been saying it since, is it better for, if capitalism, if market-led financialization takes place, is it better if it happens with a TAN? Is capitalism with a TAN better because now we're calling it BRICS? Is it really something that is a radical departure from everything that we've been doing? And I think the template essentially is very conservative. It's very tame, it's very domesticated, and it's very fearful of offending the Western hegemony, disturbing it. And I think I would slightly disagree with Dr. Ngozi's perspective, and I understand that she's certainly sitting inside the burning cauldrons. But this kind of gradualist approach, gradual until when?
Yeah, I'm just curious about our own ability to do what we need to do. We talk about changing the infrastructure of financial architectures, and yet it costs more to trade within Africa than
Absolutely.
Beyond. I don't get that.
None of us get that. None of us do. And I think that's a failure of our own. I think it's it does boil down to political will, political prioritization. Look how easy and how easily and efficiently a setup like this, to get Johannesburg looking beautiful, to get the roads fixed, to get potholes. I don't want to focus too much on that, especially for our global audience, but to get things looking pretty, functioning well. So the capacity is there. So the question is, where is the gap between the capacity and the urgency? And that could cut across many other dimensions. My other concern is that the cost of even running events like this, hosting fora like this, which could instead be distributed and allocated and directed towards the kind of the priorities that we all are well aware of. Some of our energy, the energy shedding challenges that we have, some of the challenges that we have in our public health system, the 2 billion rand Tembisa Hospital. I won't say more about that. That's resolving many more of those issues. I wonder whether our cost-benefit analysis is really giving us a really good return on that kind of investment. Can we reshape and rethink what would be a useful return on investment and investment in our energy and the immense talent that we have on the continent? I've always said that, South Africa included, we have some of the best technocrats in the world, and I'll say that with my full chest. We've got excellent technocrats. It makes your heart sing. Things do function, things do work. You do get your taxes sorted out by some faceless technocrats. You do get your ID documents. Even your passport comes back. It takes me 2 weeks, my passport is renewed. Things do function, and we don't focus enough on that. We have one of the largest feeding schemes in the world. We have 8 million children every day in this country from abject, indigent circumstances, socioeconomic circumstances, who are getting fed, and that is having some impact on learning outcomes and so on. So that there are these, and I don't want to say this in this cheesy good news way, but they are impactful, meaningful, diligent public servants who are doing incredible work. Can we not leverage on that technocratic capacity, enhance it, enlarge it, scale it up, as it were? Can we not use those sorts of models of excellent practice within our context to begin to think, well, how then do we translate this to doing this at SADC level, at East Africa level, at West Africa level, and then how do they eventually come together?
Sadly, we always run out of time in these kinds of scenarios, but Dr. Peko, it's always a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much,
Peter,
for your insights and your thoughts.
Appreciate it.
And that's how we come to the end of this live broadcast. Day 2, the final day tomorrow coming up, and we will still be here bringing you the latest developments. And of course, that's when we'll really get to see whether South Africa's leadership of the G20 is one that will reshape global economics, or is it still a case of
keep our fingers crossed,
the old story, old powers reasserting their bias against Africa?
Thanks, everybody. The news is next. And it's, you know what?
You celebrate. This is Africa Chart Toppers with Nolo Matlaila, Africa's hottest sounds, all in one place on Channel Africa. Available on the Channel Africa app.